No, I just need this to go. All right, welcome. Today is Tuesday, April the 3rd, 2018. This is a work session of the Board of County Commissioners in Pitkin County. First thing on our agenda today is a proclamation recognizing Public Health Week. I'm going to stand here, and our wonderful members and representatives of our Public Health Department and associates and people and friends. So whereas April 2nd through 8th is National Public Health Week, and the Pitkin County Public Health Department, along with public health departments all over the country, are working to help make their communities and the nation healthier. And whereas Pitkin County is ranked in the top 10 healthy counties in the state when it comes to quality of life, including factors like education level achieved, diet and exercise, income and employment, and whereas sometimes the same factors that contribute to our healthy rating can also create barriers to good health. These factors include our high cost of living, lack of affordable housing, lack of affordable and accessible health insurance, social and geographic isolation, high rates of mental health, and substance use disorders. And whereas the Pitkin County Public Health Department is committed to cultivating good health in our community by promoting health and preventing communicable disease and chronic conditions by influencing environments, policies, and systems, and through building partnerships with community-based organizations, healthcare providers, and residents focused on wellness for everyone. And whereas Pitkin County Public Health believes that everyone deserves the opportunity for a long and healthy life, we promise to support efforts to improve the social and environmental factors that affect everyone's health and limit the ability for many people to make health choices. And now, therefore, be it proclaimed that Pitkin County commemorates National Public Health Week and joins the growing movement nationwide to create the healthiest nation in one generation. Thank you very much. We appreciate everyone's efforts. And you have an award you need to make, so you need to have a mic in order to do that. Thank you. Pat, did you get your photo up? Okay.
So I just want to thank my team, and we're going to do a recognition of my team. If you can just raise your hands outside. They're not raising their hands very well. The public health partners in the room, thank you for coming. And then we also are awarding 2 public health champions. These are community members that the team has decided really exemplify public health in our community. And one of them is Dr. Kim Levin. She was not able to be here today, but we wanted to recognize her for her T21 efforts within the city of Aspen and Basalt, the town of Basalt. And then we also want to recognize Robin, who is here today. And if we can have Robin come up and get her award, and Carlin's just going to say one sentence about her.
So I work a lot with Robin. I just want to say that she's amazing. We're really lucky in the community to have her looking out for our children. She's a child care health consultant, so she works with the child care directors, and everyone speaks really highly of her. She is always pushing us and asking questions about public health, so she's a huge partner for us. Amazing community resource, and we're really, really grateful for her partnership. So thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And really quickly, I just want to add there was a great guest column in the newspaper yesterday in the Aspen Times. It was the commentary by Karen Kuhneman, our public health director. Pitkin County's public health is a community effort. This was really well done. I thank you for this. And on a side note, what's critical to our continued support for our public health department is the reauthorization of our Healthy Community Fund. We will be working on bringing this out to the public in the next couple of months for ballot question in November. So we would appreciate everyone in the room getting out and about and helping us to support the reauthorization of this fund. Thank you all for coming. Does any member of the board have anything to say? And then we need to move on.
Yeah, I wanted to tell a little bit about the documentary that will be at the Basalt Library today from 5 till 7. It's an award-winning film called Bending the Arc, and it's the film follows a team of young medical workers who ignited a global health movement by daring to make high-quality health care available to everyone, even in the world's poorest countries. So this is today, 5 o'clock at the Basalt Library, and I hope, I'm going to try to get there, and I hope other people are able to make it.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. Okay, now getting to our regular agenda. First item is the local road safety plan. Would you please introduce yourself and our invited guests?
Thank you, Patty. I'm G.R. Fielding. I'm the county engineer. And the board might remember.
Okay, guys, we have a regular meeting going on, so please, thank you.
That last January, Alex Perchetta and I were sitting here and discussing an idea of developing a local road safety plan. And Alex is back. We've been part of a team that has developed that. Today I'm also joined by R.C. Sandon from SGM and Dan Coakley from SGM. We have put together a task order with SGM to help us develop this data into a plan. And so what we have today is the draft plan. Also, I think I saw Gabe Muthing come in, and he's had a chance to take a look. And as their local road safety plan encompasses what we call the 4 E's, the 4th E is EMS, and that's why he's joined us today. So what is a holistic plan, holistic road safety plan? Really, it takes a look at big data, and it encompasses much more than just engineered solutions. What it isn't is it's not, oh, we should go put a guardrail here or put more signs up there or change our striping. It can get down to those things, and it can help get to that point on individual projects. But really, it's taking a look at all the crashes that happen within Pickens County and informing us where are we actually having problems. The good news is that for most of it, our anecdotal data up until this point was right. We kind of know where some of our problem areas are, but it totally opened our eyes as far as where we're having bigger problems than what we thought. What did it take to develop a plan like this? Well, we got a compiled data set from CDOT, and it included over 3,000 crashes that encompassed 5 years, 2010 to 2014. What we did then is we deleted all the data that happened in the city of Aspen, the town of Basalt, within Pickens County, and in the town of Snowmass Village, because that was a little bit of a different context than what a local road safety plan is. It's more of an urban setting there. And they have their own staff to help try to suss out what their issues are. We took that data set and then we had it geolocated by the Pickens County GIS department. And so all this data was basically a milepost and on a road. Thank you. And then that data was then compiled into categories. And the categories that we're going to get into, and that's what we're going to be talking about a lot. And so if we can get into those emphasis areas, those are the areas where we can have a lot of discussion.
Okay. In some of this data, you kind of ask, how do we, figure out these categories and the emphasis areas based off the 3,000 original crashes? We narrowed those down to 6 different types of emphasis areas, which I'll get into next. But with some of that data, we had to throw out some data like impairment, driving, alcohol-related stuff like that. Anything that added up to like 100 or less, we kind of threw that out because we were looking at the bigger picture here. And another thing to think about is you'll see later in the slides here is one of our emphasis areas, which is lane departures. That has many things involved in it, so that could be, running off the road or something like that. But I'm going to get into the emphasis areas next.
So we talk a little bit about compiled data. You'll hear a lot about this data and it being geolocated. And what does that mean? It means that we can map it. And so what we did with all these different emphasis areas and a lot of the different sub areas is we took that and we created what's called a density hotspot analysis. And so that's what's represented on the screen right now. And what you're going to see is a lot of maps that look just like this for each of the emphasis areas. What's really easy to suss out then is that State Highway 82 is rightly so where our deputies spend most of their time, and you can see why. This is really all of that data broken down into a graphical form, and we'll see that over and over again here.
So looking at all of our data and our emphasis areas, we broke it down into these 6 categories here, which one's winter driving conditions, bicycle pedestrian safety, roadway and lane departures, which I kind of touched on briefly earlier, distracted driving, wildlife crashes, which wasn't on our radar at first, but the data showed that wildlife crashes is definitely something we want to look into further, and then intersection safety.
A little bit on this slide too is it shows a bit of what the typical process is to go through with a local road safety plan. And at our last work session last January, what the board did is it established leadership on the project and gave staff direction to go ahead and move forward and start developing a plan. What we've done so far is what you've heard is review crash data, establish some goals, identify our emphasis areas. We've started to create those safety strategies, and that's a lot of the content that we'll be talking about. Some of the questions that we'll finish up with today is basically how we want to implement this and how and if the board would like to adopt the plan. We'll now get into those emphasis areas that we've been talking about. The first one is the winter driving conditions. And at first, I was like, yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, we're up in the mountains and it snows here and kind of duh. But when we started looking at the data, I was absolutely blown away. It accounts for 49% of our total crashes. So half of our crashes are winter driving related, which, okay, maybe not a surprise, we're in a snowy area, but then you think, all right, let's eliminate about half of the year from that because it doesn't snow. And then we do a pretty darn good job here of removing snow from the roads. And so when you really count how many days a year that we have winter driving conditions, it's not a lot. You know, if we're in the 20 to 40 day range, that's, I mean, if I were to, take a guess, that's most winters, that's about where we're at throughout the county. So that's half of our crashes in that small amount of time. It's been relatively consistent from year to year. And you asked what a winter driving condition is. It's basically whenever there's snow, ice, freezing rain, the road is snow covered or we're in the middle of a storm event is essentially how we broke out that data.
Hey, GR, real quick on that. Are you able to break it out on days of the week, things like that, or approximately to the weather event?
Well,
just wondering.
Well, I mean, we can certainly, with the data that we have, we could certainly pinpoint, oh, this happened on this storm, or this happened, and this is how many that we get per storm. We didn't get down into that level of data, or into the data with this. That was actually something that was the first thing that Alex said this morning when we were meeting as a team.
Yeah, I would love to use the data that we have right now and that we're presenting to you and get down into that granular aspect of it and use it as a tool to direct our patrol activities in the sheriff's office to say on Monday in this month the 5-year trend historically is between this time and this time we tend to see an accident at this intersection. We tend to see hotspots as you can see depicted on the map above, and use that as a tool, the statistical analysis of that data to actually direct some of the patrol activities that we're doing. So it hasn't been done yet, but we intend to do it.
Yeah, and if you take a look at this map here, this is going to look very similar to the all crashes map, just for the simple fact that winter conditions takes up almost 50% of the total crashes that we analyze. So that's.
Can you point out the hot spots also? I'm having trouble reading the colored. I'm assuming red's the worst, of course, but.
Yes, sure. One of the things that at first what I'll point out is it's pretty easy to see the delineation of State Highway 82 on these maps because that's where just about all of our real hot spots are located. The other thing that the board can see with winter driving conditions, you can see a number of crashes on county roads, but they're mostly one-offs, except for on 2 roads. You can actually easily see Lotta Curve on Owl Creek, and you can also see about where Pioneer Springs is on Brush Creek, about milepost 1, and those are some of the hot spots. And when I first talked to Alex about where the data was pointing to on the winter conditions accidents, those are a couple of the ones where I think he named one and I named the other without even really looking at it. as far as on the maps, the red is the worst, and we're looking at, I think it's in the tune of 23 or more for the darkest red, and then it's graded down, and the darkest green is 1 to 2 crashes in a location.
So it gives you a really great visual representation of where those problem areas are historically, at least in 2010 to 2014. And again, this is the data that I'd love to use to direct our patrol activities.
Right, and you've got the ABC and roundabout, and I'm trying to orient myself.
You can also, let me see if I can.
Yeah, just look at where your
so
neighborhood is. Brush
this
Creek.
is the city of Aspen down here. This is this is the Owl Creek light. This is the Brush Creek light. Smith Hill. This is
Probably mile 30 of the turnaround.
this is Aspen Village.
That signal.
And then, here we go. From here to here, this is Snowmass Canyon. We could change a lot of the the results of the data if we were to include or take out Snowmass Canyon. It's a really big hotspot for anyone that commutes up and down the valley. Kind of knows that as far as winter driving conditions. And then we can also see when you get into Basalt, this is the Two Rivers light. This is the Basalt Ave light, and then you can see this is right around Emma.
So it's interesting that the hotspots seem to be spotted around signals.
Yes.
So technically people, to me, would be people not slowing down, people speeding, rear-ending, whatever, the flow of traffic.
And you'll
is.
see as we continue further that
Yeah.
a lot of this stuff kind of, it's very, it
Yeah, you
aligns
ca-
itself together.
It's pretty clear.
So just looking at that, the winter driving conditions, some of the key facts to take away is this, the majority of them from a winter condition results in a lane departure, which is your vehicle leaving the traveled way and obstructing something off the, on the shoulder of the road or what have you. And then following that is rear end collisions and broadside collisions, which just so happen to happen at intersections a lot as well.
Is there any data associated with the speed? How many of these people were traveling?
We looked into that, but it was very sporadic. It was kind of all over the place, and there was no real localized hotspot areas where the speed,
That jumped out at you
Yeah,
for
that really
speed.
jumped out, but we did look into that.
So when we talk about what's in a local road safety plan, we talk about the 4 E's: education, enforcement, engineering, and EMS. Education and enforcement is always an interesting one because we're talking about a lot of driver behavior. The engineering is a lot of times what we can do from a built or what a lot of the engineering projects typically look like. With a lot of what's in our local road safety plan, EMS was a little bit more of a difficult nut to crack because we are dealing with our very unique context of what our demographic of the valley is. Alex will talk a little bit about the education and enforcement and a little bit of how the philosophy of the sheriff's office plays into that.
So I don't think I have to regale you with the philosophy of the sheriff's office, but I will say that it is worth noting that the sheriff gives us the discretion to go out, and in the context that we have with the public and the citizens and visitors of Pickens County, to when we pull them over on a traffic stop or we're on a car accident and we're talking to them, we don't always write tickets. It's a big component of what we of how we feel is the most effective way to get the information across is not necessarily through the enforcement component, but through that dialogue and that education, and to explain to them, why 69 in the Snowmass Canyon on a snowy day is just not appropriate. And a $37 speeding ticket at that point really doesn't do too much. So we view this from the standpoint of education. However, I will say that when enforcement is appropriate, we will write the ticket for someone who is clearly violating one of the state traffic laws. But we do err on the side of education, and I think you've seen that through the partnership that we've done with the Public Safety Council recently on some of the distracted driving campaigns that we've had, which GR will get to shortly, and some of the upcoming campaigns that we'll be doing through the Public Safety Council in 2018. But we're excited to partner with GR and on the local road safety plan, and to bring to it what we can both in education and enforcement.
Now, is the county tire tread law a suggestion? Because we don't currently have one, do we? I know the state does, correct?
That's correct. There is already one in the state, and but as Alex was saying, right now it's at their discretion whether or not they enforce that. But if the county ever wanted to, we could bolster that or have something different, or we could, a tool that is in the toolbox, whether or not we want to use it or not, is say we wanted to have a chain law like the town of Snowmass Village has for, say, Brush Creek or something like that. I'd say that a lot of times things like that were pretty physically constrained, where if we were to do that, we would be probably pretty remiss that if we didn't just have a nice chain up area for people to
lighted chain up area.
Right. And so there's all those things in context that are hard. What these 4 E's you're going to see, though, are the things that we eliminated a lot of the tools that are identified for that, and these are things that we could talk about. Is there any appetite for doing a county tire tread law? From the engineering side, we can talk about trying to reduce operational speeds. Some of the tools that we have for doing those things might not be the right thing to do in the context of winter driving, because when I go back to this map and I can show you that we have crashes at all 3 of this, or across the big straightaway on Owl Creek, as people are on and off their brakes and accelerating going across the straightaway there, where we're already doing traffic calming, then maybe the speed reduction is something that we can look into further, and it needs to be in a very specific context. And so these are all just general ideas that we're seeing in the 4 E's, and that'll come out as we go into some of the other emphasis areas as well. Roadside delineation, I think, is a big one, because when we looked at winter driving conditions, we have already talked about lane departures. It's so big that it's also its own emphasis area. And things like delineation are huge. We do a pretty good job with striping our roads once a year. We do a pretty good job with having the right signage where we're at. If we further delineate the road to help people know where the shoulder of the road exactly is, that would help, especially in winter driving conditions where we could have things like false shoulders and things of that nature. We can also do what can also come out of this is the board can direct staff to use this as the stepping stone, and when we do our capital maintenance programming, to say, yeah, we would like to spend X percentage of our budget, or we would like to say, as each project comes up for consideration by the board through the budget cycle, that if it's appropriate, when you bring East Cypress Creek Road in, take a look at what our signage is, or do we have any hot spots? Same with Brush Creek Road. When we bring Brush Creek Road back for a project, what can we do there to help eliminate some of these things from an engineering standpoint?
GR, since the majority of these are along State Highway 82, when we look at, I think it was funded by the state when they put the rumble strips along Highway 133, that seems to, I'm assuming that's helped in terms of people not getting out of their lanes. Do we have the ability to look at state funding for those rumble strips along 82, certainly along some of these hot spots?
Absolutely, George. And that is a really good point and segue into something that I had in a couple slides. One of the great things about this plan is it gives us a very easy tool to use in our conversations with the state over treatments to State Highway 82 and to State Highway 133. And I think that the board has a pretty good comprehension of a lot of the limitations that CDOT has right now on what they can do, when they can do it. But when there are specific ideas or specific things that we can point to, they're very receptive about partnering or doing something to combat this. Part of this program was born out of the CDOT's Towards Zero Death initiative, and so they're very receptive to hearing our ideas on this, whether it be rumble strips or wildlife fencing or some of these other ideas. We're going to move on to the next emphasis area unless there's anything else about the winter driving that the board wants to hit on.
Go ahead.
Just a quick one, just regarding data, demographic data. Do we have data on whether or not the accident involved a visitor who just picked up a rental car, for instance, or somebody who just got back to town? Or I'm just wondering, the first time you're out on an icy road, it takes a little while to figure out what the risk is.
Without getting either extremely granular, no, because we could go pull all the accident reports and see what what the driver's license was from, but not in this data. No, it's not cooked into this. There's a few things that we can take out of it anecdotally, but there's a few things like driver inexperience that's cited, and it's not just about a teenage driver. It's about the person who's here from the south that's maybe seen snow twice and they're driving through a blizzard.
Right. I'm just thinking that what that would lead to is if they're coming to the airport and getting a rental car, what data, what information do we have on site at the rental car agency?
Well, I think with this in particular, and especially the winter driving conditions, I was going to kind of hit on this when we got to distracted driving, but with the distracted driving, last year we knew that was an issue. So we've already done a public outreach campaign a little bit in the guise of a plan like this. And I could very easily see that be a very good place to start as a next step for the local road safety plan, is saying, okay, maybe we should go out and do an education campaign around winter driving. And whether or not that includes maybe pamphlets that you get when you go to the airport at the Avis counter, or it's a compilation of videos of winter driving tips. Or it's an interview with Alex or a couple of the deputies, like, hey, if you're driving in Pickens County during the winter, here's some of the things that you should consider. Another thing, as far as education, if this is one of the things that the board wants to pursue, is, you can go out and buy tire gauges for $10 and give them to every deputy. And when they have a stop, they can just dip a tire and say, hey, just so you know, you're getting kind of close on those tires, and it's snowing, or we're going to get a big 10-inch dump here in the next couple days, and you might want to consider taking a look at some snow tires because. And what we did for the distracted driving campaign, they actually had a card that they could hand to people during stops about distracted driving.
George.
Last thing, while you're on the winter driving, it seems like one of the more successful campaigns that the Sheriff's Department has undertaken is the pace car going through Snowmass Canyon in the wintertime during those, the 4 o'clock afternoon when you get the ice melt and then the frozen. I think that's been really effective. I know it's a question of sheriff's resources, but can you speak to how effective that you think that has been?
It's been tremendously effective in reducing the number of accidents in the Snowmass Canyon while we're doing it. It's interesting to mention that we implemented the pacing program after 2014, or right towards the end of the 2014 winter season. So the data that we're looking at doesn't necessarily reflect data during a pacing operation campaign, so to speak. But in the times that we've done it before, the deputies get out there, they're highly visible, they slow the traffic down to a reasonable speed at the discretion of the deputy, 25, maybe 20 miles an hour sometimes. And I can say that with 100% certainty that while we're doing that, we have had no crashes in the Snowmass Canyon during that campaign.
So by pace car, you mean the sheriff gets in front of the traffic and leads it through. When George said that, my first thought was seeing the Indianapolis pace car or the NASCAR pace
It's not
car.
to set the pace at 100.
We had those going through Snowmass Canyon?
Get them through quickly.
We purposefully they did this. State Patrol did this on Eisenhower Tunnel, I think, back in 2013.
I stayed in California sometimes when you're down there.
Yeah, it's effective. It's effective.
So do we, along that line, Alex, do we get any support from State Patrol to help supplement your staff?
We do. So one of the notification processes that we do, not only notify the public through Pick and Alert, but our dispatch center notifies State Patrol as well. And if they have a trooper in the area, which they often do, they'll come up and take part. And now that we're on the same radio system, it makes it easier to operate together.
And one of the things that I'd like to do when we get through a number of the emphasis areas too is come back and say, hey, we really we want to focus on winter driving or ped safety or whatever the case may be. And that way we can bring back a couple of these, hey, can we bolster the pace car thing during storms, or specific engineering ideas for some projects coming up, and then that way we can identify things that are a little bit easier to chew on than a little bit more of the esoteric idea of an overarching plan.
Well, yeah, I think we appreciate that, but especially in light of the numbers around the intersections, and you and I have talked about this before, the flashing light at Old Snowmass intersection when you're coming out of Snowmass Canyon, that works really well. They should actually have one at Catherine's store, which is out of our jurisdiction, but that might be something we can discuss as far as something we could do proactively at the intersections too.
The next emphasis area that we identified was bicycle and pedestrian safety. The difficult thing about this was that data isn't always captured in traffic crash data. But the crazy thing is that there are some of those crashes identified within that data, which is a little bit scary when you think about it. We had a good problem in our putting together our plan because most counties that do this are usually the rural areas around larger metropolitan areas. And so they have big numbers to deal with. I think we only had about 10 fatalities in our entire data set, but unfortunately some of them were incorporated into this area, and that's why between that and a lot of anecdotal data when we first started this is why this became an emphasis area. The good news though is that we've already taken enormous steps as a county to start looking at bike and ped safety, whether it's funding underpass projects or it's pushing the state to maybe put accoutrement next to a bridge, whether it's taking a look at pedestrian and bicycle corridors in and out of town, or up to the music school. All of these sorts of things play into that. And so again, as I said earlier, we've already started down the right path with a lot of this. This is a lot of data to back up a lot of decisions that are already made and help push us in the right directions otherwise. With the bicycle and ped safety, the one thing that I did want to say is there's not a lot to do with, say, enforcement, but there's a lot that can be done in education and maybe a little bit in enforcement and a little bit in the engineering, when we start talking about projects and things of that nature. What we did see too is that this is one of the only areas where we had a higher concentration on county roads than we had on the state highway. And one would expect that with the numbers of, say, bicyclists that we see up Castle Creek and Maroon Creek and up in Old Snowmass. And I won't give up George's new road cycle spot up from the house, but
the secret spot, George.
But we do have a high, because you're not going to get this reported unless there's a really big injury. That comes out in the data that most of these crashes involve some sort of injury to the pedestrian or to the bicyclist. I don't know if
I was going to say bicycle wildlife.
Yeah, there's we
do have some history of that.
It didn't come up on.
Break that down.
It didn't come up, but we're all looking at John to see. The bicycle. I don't know if John's crash got reported. Bicycle versus wildlife, but that's certainly It's certainly been an issue, and anecdotally, I can tell you I've heard of several of those crashes where bicyclists has either been avoiding wildlife or anything like that. But it's an interesting cross section.
Mike.
Yeah.
We didn't really want to say that.
And as I said, we're doing a lot of this already. I think that when talking to Alex and some others in the law enforcement community, there is some work to do here to put out some more understanding of what the existing laws are, because there's some confusion around what the single file law is and what the passing law is and how much buffer you're supposed to have and things like that. And it's whether or not we want to take that up as a county, whether or not we want to ask our law enforcement to help with that education, or if it's something that we want to push as far as simple things like helmet usage amongst bicyclists and things of that nature. From the engineering standpoint, we've talked about in the past doing shoulder widening projects, but those sorts of things are pretty cost prohibitive. And we can get a lot of bang for the buck from the safety aspect from doing education, But as an engineer and as the county engineer, I would love to do a shoulder widening project. I think it would be a really cool amenity. But I understand that in our context, that's a little bit hard.
We might have one or two of those coming up.
Yeah. And again, under engineering, it's taking a look at things like crosswalks and trail pavement markings or grade separated crossings. And as the board knows, the EOTC's funded $40,000 into looking at the buttermilk and a warrant study there. Keeping doing those things are moving us in the right direction and looking at this. Again, this is the data behind making those decisions.
I think one of the upcoming challenges will be a whole new population of bicyclists who are utilizing e-bikes out of rental shops, who are really not bicyclists per se, they're novices, but all of a sudden they're on an e-bike, which allows them to go places like up Castle Creek, up Maroon Creek, places they would not normally venture. And so when you talk about education, I think we need to really have some strong outreach to the rental shops that they give out to their renters to alert them of the dangers that they don't, it's sort of like the skis, when shape skis first came up, all of a sudden everybody was a great skier, but people were sort of over skiing from their ability, and I see that potentially happen with e-bikes, with rentals, and a whole new population entering that area.
Some of our strategy in this emphasis area in our actual local road safety plan, the big report we address exactly what you just said. Getting in front of those key people like bike shops and stuff like that to get that message out there.
Yeah, great.
All right, on to the next emphasis area.
Yeah, roadway and lane departures is a result of other causes like winter conditions or distracted driving, but it's the result and it's the accident. And in terms of results, it's the biggest type of accident that we came across. Thanks, Jared.
Where was that photo taken?
Not here.
I was going to say, I don't see any mountains in there.
So you can see the key facts. Winter conditions is the biggest contributor to lane departures, and then the other items are what happens when there is a lane departure, and those are some of the engineering things that may be able to be solved.
So if I can just interject really quick, what's interesting about this is the fact that when we have a lane departure here, we've got a lot of barriers, guardrail, and fixed objects, but we also have a lot of topography to deal with. And so because we have a decent percentage of crashes against concrete barrier, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's actually a good thing. That's why the concrete barrier is there. But it's a really interesting data point that 18% or whatever it is of the crashes that depart a lane crash into concrete barrier.
Snowmass Canyon.
Yeah,
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. And they are things that make the road safer. And we could get into data about was there an injury in that accident and things like that we haven't done yet. But yeah, they are safety measures. And I think the importance of addressing this emphasis area is just to reduce injuries and the severity of crashes. And so I think the education and enforcement is, that from this emphasis area, that gets taken care of in whether it's winter driving conditions or distracted driving. I think this is one area where engineering can be more involved, and we can look at better delineation of the roadside edges, making sure the proper edge treatments are on the side of the road, whether it's concrete barrier, guardrail, or no guardrail, and have a recoverable slope. And look at other items that I don't think are big issues in the county, but we haven't gotten into the data to look at, is there a reverse curve where there's a significant problem, or is there a curve where the super elevation goes the wrong way and tends to push people off the road in winter conditions. So we can look at things like that as this moves forward.
Well, I have a question. When we do the lane delineation or roadside delineation, we also have to look at our snow plowing, and how is that going to affect, we don't want to put up roadside delineation and have to put it up every year after snow plowing. So, I mean, that's another complicated part of living in the mountains, and having
Welcome
to
to the conversation that frequently happens between engineering and road and bridge in the Public Works office, Patty. And those are exactly the types of conversations that we have, and they're not always the easiest conversations between us and operations. But when we have things that have been shown to be effective, we can implement them intelligently for our context. And that is one of the things of why you don't see, we'd like to put a delineator every 528 feet down a straightaway throughout the entire county. That isn't a bullet in here, but I can tell you that's what the book says to do. But I can also tell you that when we have those conversations in our office, we say, well, let's start delineating more on our roads where we're seeing this. So we've already started on Brush Creek Road. We did a couple of the curves, and what we did is we stopped at that point because we wanted to eventually have this conversation and see where this goes with the board to see if, taking a look at these roadway departures and lane departures, if that's something that we'd like to focus on, then yes, we can go out and what's amazing is how effective and how well the road and bridge guys can avoid delineators on the side of the road when they're the ones that put them in. But they're also the ones that will come back to the office, and I'll be the first one here that they hit one of my delineaters. But
you made them put in?
But you're right. It's something that we do have to take into context with our operations, and that's that's a little bit of the hard part of our jobs. And this also gets to a bit of what George was talking about earlier as far as rumble strips. This is one of the areas where we have an engineering solution to one of our problems that helps. It doesn't fix it, it helps. And so it wakes you up a little bit if you get over the white line onto the shoulder, or if you're crossing the double yellow line. And I think with the data that we have, it'd be a little bit of an easier conversation to have with CDOT, being like, hey, based on the data that we've seen on crashes through Snowmass Canyon, can we put some rumble strips through there, or can we add some delineation? Can we do something more, in these locations so that we can reduce the number of crashes that we have?
I had a question on your bar graphs. One accident could have fit more than one of these categories, and those
Absolutely.
are tracked in this data, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah, this is going to add up to well over 100%.
For instance, in my wreck, which was one of the dots on a county road, lane departure from a guy coming the other way on a snowy road, and we departed our lane to go into the ditch, and he ran into us anyhow. So it was a side swipe kind of a thing, which would fit.
Yeah, so you would
different
have
categories here.
Yeah, you would fit into the side swipe opposite direction. You would fit into
Did you hit a fence?
Yeah.
Run over any animals?
And that's throwing some trees and shrubbery.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Just wanted to clarify that.
All right, so on to the next one is distracted driving. And this one is another interesting data problem that we had, because it accounts for 11% of the crashes. But if anyone in here has been a part of a crash in Pekin County, especially the rural part, you usually have a lot of time to figure out kind of what happened before you start talking to a deputy or a cop. And so you can figure out pretty quickly that a big chunk of that 11% is self-reported distracted driving, or something that they said led the responding officer to cite them for distracted driving, or maybe they saw it. But distractions also, too, I just want to be clear, isn't just our new age era when we have our cell phone and we're trying to do two things at once. Distractions are due to many factors, and the definition is up on the screen right now. It includes activity outside the vehicle, activity inside the vehicle. It may be a child or a pet, or use of an electronic device, or eating. Eating is one that you see all the time, especially in this valley, because people have, they have a meeting in Basalt, they have a meeting in Aspen, and there's
Or putting on
40
your
minutes in
makeup.
between. Yeah, putting on makeup.
Putting on makeup.
There's all these different things that constitute distracted driving. The other interesting thing on the distracted driving was, again, we got to see a bunch of our intersections highlighted, but it was one of the few emphasis areas, and I put the map into the presentation because it doesn't necessarily mimic the bigger map as much. It doesn't, like, there's a couple of them where you flip from map to map and you think it's the same map. This one you can actually see the difference a bit in, but we still do have a couple big hotspots at some of our intersections. And that's to be expected too. The basalt intersection where the underpass was built, I think that I probably told a number of the board members anecdotally that we'd be out there and we would, every single light cycle, we would see people hold up traffic because they're on their phone and they didn't go when it went green, or the third car didn't go when it went green. So instead of getting 40 cars through the queue, you only got 20 cars through the queue. So there's other consequences other than just pure safety and what's going to come out of the data here too. What we did see though is, again, this distracted driving, a huge part of lane departure. And that's the thing that we saw over and over is lane and roadway departures. Complicate that with winter driving conditions and you get a nice 24% of our crashes. And then also rear ends, and that's to be expected. The person's not watching, they're coming up to a light, maybe traffic is stopped, or maybe in the context of the light turns green, someone's distracted, and then someone rear ends them. It's still the person who's driving's fault, but with distracted driving, actually, I want to go back to this slide. And there's a graphic here at the bottom, and it's a Dia de Muertes skull. And this is an actual piece of collateral that was produced by the Pekin County Public Safety Council last year. I would kind of consider this the first public outreach and education campaign that was talked about a little bit in this context of a local road safety plan. And the deputies got these cards and they handed them out during traffic stops. And I think Alex can talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, so by state law, we're required to identify ourselves on these traffic contacts. So generally, we would give out a normal business card with our contact information on it. Well, we went to a traffic warning card that has this information on it. On the back side of the card, it has generic information about why it's important not to drive distracted and some of the state laws that are around surrounding distracted driving. It was wildly successful. I think we handed out over 1,500 of those cards during the campaign. It's not over yet, of course. It's one of the things that we're going to continue to hammer on this year in 2018 as we start that public outreach campaign at the Public Safety Council. And we continue to do radio interviews on it. So it's one of those things that we continue to educate the public about is distracted driving. But I think to GR's point, everyone thinks it's primarily texting and driving. Well, that's just the statute, the law, the texting and driving statute at the state level. But it does involve so many other factors like distractions inside your car, outside of your car, unfamiliarity with the area, and you're driving around not looking at the road, you're looking at traffic signs or maybe just the beautiful mountains. So there's all sorts of things that play into it.
Two more things on this one. I can tell you, as a father of two now, my last crash was distracted driving, and and it involved a piece of technology, namely an iPad, but I wasn't using it. I was trying to get my kids to share it. And so there's a lot of different ways this can happen. And the last thing on this too, for me though, that I want to say is now that we have a campaign in the box, on the shelf, as Alex just pointed out, we can put that out and just brush it off and update it and do what we need to do. For those sorts of education campaigns. And so if we were to do one for, say, winter driving conditions, it's not something that we're just going to do it once and okay, we're done, we did it, good job. No, it's something that, like Alex said, it's ongoing, and we can always re-hit it in the future.
One of the things that strikes out with the distracted drivers, I'm surprised of how low the number is for alcohol meds contributing to it, and maybe that speaks to our long ongoing Don't Drink and Drive campaign.
Possibly, but could it also be part of the fact that some of that information was pulled out of the data set?
Yeah, so in the beginning I had mentioned that like impairment was actually pulled out of the overall analysis, just for the simple fact that it was so sporadic and it was under 100 total crashes. So we're trying to analyze kind of the bigger picture rather than that.
So actually, George, yes, you're right. Because we've had such a long history of it, it gets pulled out because we didn't end up having an emphasis area where I can't tell you, I probably went through a dozen local road safety plans and putting this together, and almost every single one of them has an intoxicated driving emphasis area. We do a really good job there. We actually didn't put it in because it wasn't to the numbers that we're seeing here.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Yeah.
We had 87 for alcohol, 13 for alcohol and drugs. So, 96 total.
Yeah.
This next one, this was the one that a little bit came out of the blue for me. Even through my first suss through the data, wildlife crashes really wasn't on my radar. It did account for 17% of our crashes, so 215 out of 1,240. There was a bit of injury involved with that, but mostly it was the property damage factor. And I think that hopefully everyone in this room knows exactly how much property damage occurs when you hit an elk. We've had county vehicles that have hit elk that have been totaled and not even close. I mean, they were totaled. Just yesterday, there was a bus from RAFTA that hit an elk on State Highway 82, and I did a significant amount of damage to a bus.
As Dan Blankenship walks in the room.
I engineered that.
I know.
This wildlife data one is really cool because it was probably the easiest one for us to go into the second level of data graphically. And so what you can see here is some of the wildlife corridors superimposed onto our crash map. And so we can see some of the corridor through here, and we can see a little hotspot. We can see a corridor here on State Highway 82, and we can see an adjacent hotspot. I think Alex can probably tell you about where the holes in the fences are for the elk to get through. I think that those would probably coordinate pretty well with where we have our hotspots in these crashes. We can see that the one that surprised me the most actually is this one right here. This would be
Is that Old Snowmass
Old
signal?
Snowmass intersection.
Yeah.
The deer come up and down the mountain to the
When we
river.
were doing our highway
the
cleanup
river?
there last year, I was surprised by the amount of plastic, first of all, from all the wrecks.
Sorry about that.
But there were 2 dead deer that had been hit right there.
Yeah. And
So it doesn't surprise me to see a hot spot.
And again, with an emphasis area like this and having it in our plan, this gives us a tool to help communicate with where we have our biggest problem on the state highway. It can help us champion projects and do things of that nature. But it's also one of those where if the board so directed, we could work with CDOT, and also they have a pretty I'm going to come back to this. I'm sorry. They have a pretty broad Colorado Wildlife on the Move campaign, and that's one of the messages that we see on the VMS boards up and down the valley frequently during the high crash times. It's a plan just like this that informs these sorts of education campaigns that CDOT puts out. And so there's a lot of different tools that we can do for education on this. Enforcement, there's frankly really not much that you can do. From an engineering standpoint, though, again, we can use this as the tool to talk to the state or to look at on our roads if whether or not we wanted to do something on, I think Brush Creek was the one place where we really kind of came into some data on our data set. But identify localized areas and what maybe we change up some signage. But I'm going to tell you that the wildlife fencing and the detection systems have been pretty successful in other areas.
Yeah, and you may be able, and Brian knows this because Brian and I serve on the Intermountain Transportation Regional Planning Committee, and there are dollars that are available specifically for wildlife mitigation. And so if we had that information, we could bring that forward in terms of a funding requests.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Exactly. And that's exactly that link that I've been talking about putting the data behind an initiative.
And there's an uptick right now, because just driving the highway, there are more and more roadkill. And you can tell where those corridors are, and it's really been significant this last couple of weeks.
And I'm going to tell you that this intersection safety picture is not anywhere in Pickens County. It was just meant to emphasize the number of conflict points that can actually happen.
I thought that was the entrance to Aspen, the new entrance to Aspen.
Yeah.
Well, they're doing the Castle Creek Bridge. That's why it's $4.3 million. This is what we're going to get.
So for
Cemetery Lane, or is that 8th Street? I don't know.
For intersection safety, it was our last emphasis area, and obviously
Don't give him any idea.
it's kind of anything that happens at or near an intersection, and it accounted for 18%, 220 of the 1240 crashes, and obviously with that, there's always a lot of property damage, pretty much always some sort of an injury, and there's an upward trend. Just for the simple fact that more people are driving distracted and they're on their electronic device or whatever else is going on there.
Dude, how does a pedestrian get through that? Oh, is there an underpass or anything?
So some of the key facts here is, as to be expected, is the rear end collisions. That was right around the 45% mark, and again, that just correlates with a lot of the other things that we've already touched on. And same thing with lane departures and the broadside collisions.
Broadside is people running the lights.
Yep.
Are
Go ahead, Steve.
the wild animal related at the intersections? Is that any way related to the wildlife fences? Go so far and then they get to the intersection and then they don't have the wildlife fence. So is that related at all?
That's something we have to look
know?
into a little further. The data just...
I can tell you anecdotally that we don't have a lot of wildlife fence other than near the airport in Pickens County. A lot of the other areas
Down in Garfield.
Yeah, most of the wildlife fencing that we have is down in Garfield, because you go through Mid-Valley, through Emma, we don't have any. Through the canyon, we don't.
Well, through Snowmass Canyon there is.
Oh, is there? Okay.
Yeah,
so.
and it directs them to that one underpass, the wildlife underpass. But you said the accidents were really occurring like by the post office in Old Snowmass, where they're running down the hill and crossing over the road to get to the river. Yeah, you can see that where that would happen.
So, some of the strategies here, again, just to highlight what we've been talking about the whole time, and so much of the education and enforcement is already addressed in the other emphasis areas. They kind of, curtail along with all the rest of them. And this is the intersection is an area where we can implement some engineering. We didn't dig that deep yet, but this is where we can get into some of those enhanced signage, pavement markings, start to analyze the actual traffic and timing. These queues that are caused and that backs traffic up, someone's on their phone, crash. We can start to really dig into that deeper and analyze those things. And same thing with just sight distance, triangles, and everything that is engineering around an intersection.
This is the good spot, Patty, for the advanced sign, like at Old Snowmass. Be like, yeah, we like those. Can we do those in other places where we have lights? And the answer is we can talk to CDOT about that if that's what we want to do.
I think it shows, huge safety mitigation issues there, I think.
All right, so that brings us through all of our emphasis areas. So a lot of the questions the board's had is, what do we do next, or how do we use this, and where does that put us as a county? As far as what our role is I think we can keep being a safety champion, because I think we already have been doing that. I think that a lot of what's come out of the plan for me is that we're doing a lot of the right things, but it can help us, give us a little bit of focus. I can tell you from a capacity standpoint, we don't have the staff to go out and have a person who's in charge of safety from an engineering standpoint. It's not how we're equipped right now. So I think as being that champion, I think that's a big part of our role. I think this is a great stepping stone. I think that, if going forward we want to engage the state, what data we have now, and we can further crunch it to get to some of the answers that we would need if we were going to go ask the state for wildlife fencing or for some of those blinking signs before an intersection or things like that. The next question is whether or not the board would like to adopt this plan. We talked internally. I talked to the attorney's office about this, and we have what we call the road maintenance and management plan. And one of the things that's lacking is a safety section. And we could add a safety section and then have this folded in there. From a standpoint of, does this put us on the hook for doing all these safety improvements? The answer is not necessarily no. It's one of those things we're restricted by our budget, and just like road design standards, a lot of our roads were designed in the 1800s, so they don't necessarily fall neatly into the books that we have as engineers now. This would be something similar to that. But I guess, the question is would the board like to see this at some point come forward as something that's adopted with the road maintenance and management plan?
Yes, Steve.
Well, I think so. When I was reading through the plan, it seemed complicated to me, but you gave the abbreviated version here, which just laid it out. It was very easy to follow and understand, and I could see that we might want to adopt different policies in terms of the road engineering or public education or whatever different things. So I think if you took this plan and then came up with a list of maybe a prioritized list of recommendations for the coming year or the coming next 3 years or something, that I think that could be very useful.
I think it should be folded in. I'm familiar with the maintenance plan. It makes sense to put it there. As far as I would like to see hard numbers to crash reductions to see what our progress has been and where we should focus maybe the next phase around. I really think that I would like to see us look into getting CDOT to help us fund some of those signal warning flashing signs. I think that's makes a significant difference, especially when you look at where those hot spots are located around the intersections with signals. Public education, of course, you're doing a great job. Let's continue doing it, especially Georgia's point about e-bikes, rental cars, getting something that they could hand out for people who are coming here for winter driving. Tire tread, sounds like easy. Let's equip everybody with one of those. They can just educate people, not necessarily fine them unless it's obviously blatant or really was significant in contributing to the accident, but let people know, hey, buddy, your tires are getting really, fine, and you need to really be thinking about this. And the other thing is George's points about funding opportunities, working with CDOT, looking at wildlife mitigation grants we can get or whatever we can do cooperatively. We have a good cooperative relationship with CDOT, and I think we should further that with dollars from the state. So I think that would be important to me. I think we kind of know where the hot spots are, but actually seeing them on these maps makes it blatantly obvious, where our real concerns and where our attention. And even though it is on the Highway 82 corridor, those are still our drivers and our people coming and going. So we need to be doing whatever we can to keep people safe. Steve, again?
Just a couple of thoughts. I think that speed is related to a lot of the things on Highway 82. And I've called it the NASCAR race before, and it's really people trying to get from Aspen to Carbondale or Glenwood or wherever as fast as possible. And they are just going too fast for the conditions. And I think the self-driving car technologies, like one of the county cars has, the car will slow down. You're not going to rear in somebody in front of you because the car slows down automatically. And I think with more and more cars having that kind of technology, there probably will be a reduction in accidents.
You're right. Yeah.
Well, Steve, the interesting thing about the automated driving technologies, I think that's going to be something that's emerging. It's obviously going to be a bit controversial to start. We've just seen one of our first fatality accidents with that, using that technology. But with an area like this, too, I could see potential for looking at test sections in rural areas. And if that was ever something that was interesting to the board, we'd be more than happy to look into situations like that. Yet. But it's going to be a while before that really gets implemented, especially in rural areas. But I think that there, like anything, there's always very interesting one-offs too that can be looked at.
Greg, please.
Just I keep thinking about the rumble strips on the side, and what's the efficacy? Most of our crashes are in the winter, or at least a large percentage of our lane departures are in the winter. If the rumble strips have any ice or snow on them, they become ineffective, I assume, and then there must be a maintenance issue as well, or a life of the highway issue if it's already serrated. Is that correct?
Well, you will see things like potholes develop around because of freeze thaw and the fact that the rumble strip will hold water. I can tell you most of the time you will feel the rumble strip through snow. They don't get that that packed in. They're less effective during winter because you might just be plowing right over that thing if you're, say, missing a turn. But really the reason for those is to give you that jolt, to tell you where you're at and give you another type of perception. And from that standpoint, most of the time it is effective. Whether or not it saves you or not, it depends on how severe of a circumstance that you're in.
It's still effective in winter.
It can be, for sure, yeah.
And we just have to decide what the message is that it tells you as you're rolling across it.
So they've actually ground rumble strips into roads that can play a song.
And just to highlight on that, the data, the winter condition was, a little over 606 winter accidents around the winter condition, and on dry roads it was over 700.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Still, it's useful in the summer too, obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just want to make sure it's not useless in the winter.
Right.
And my final thing on this is that it all sounds great. Where to choose, what it's going to cost. Obviously, you're working on optimizing and being efficient with it. So I'm looking at do we want to formally adopt this? I'm thinking, not yet, but it's good, and I like where it's going.
The other thing too is if you're driving in the winter, say through Snowmass Canyon, and it hasn't been fully plowed yet, you can actually see where people drive, and they don't drive in the lanes. If you follow the tracks ahead of you, the people are definitely not in the laneage. I mean, they create their, they cut the corners, you do the apex, you come through them differently. So it's interesting to see that and how it shoves people closer to one side or closer to the other when you can't see the lines on the road.
Absolutely.
It's really interesting to follow that. George?
So this is really a great roadmap, and it's appropriate to use that terminology, I think, because it is a roadmap to really be able to, I think, highlight these key areas with emphasis, utilize the data to go after ideas for improvement, whether it be engineering or education. Certainly be able to utilize for CDOT. So I'm in full support in terms of incorporating. This makes perfect sense to incorporate this into our overall safety road and bridge plan as just a component. And that way it's always in there. We can continue just to plug away at it as we have time and resources to be able to pursue that. I particularly like that, not necessarily like it, but the information we got from the Emma area where CDOT took down our signages there in terms of knowing where the exit is and the blinking light. I'd like to see this go forward to CDOT and as showing that, we need to have that back.
Oh, it's
back in
scary
place.
trying to figure out where to turn there.
So if that works, that means we're able to really utilize this data effectively and make some safety improvements.
Yeah. Anything else from the board? Jared, do you have anything? Oh, this was great presentation. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the time. I know that some of these big data types of presentations are difficult. I hope that we
No, you did a great job.
That was an
got
easy
to
one.
communicate it well. So thank you.
No, I appreciate it.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
all
gentlemen.
coming.
Thanks.
Okay, now we're going to stay on the highway here. We're just going to a different form of transportation. So, Brian, I guess you are the one speaking on the RAFTA future planning update. And I question on here, where's Dan Blankenship? But I see he's here too.
Yeah. We'll just let the gang climb up to the table.
And just make sure we introduce everyone for the public record.
I'm Brian Pettit. I'm the Public Works Director.
You can sit. I don't know if that mic's working, so you might want to just bring a seat around.
Sit over here, David. It's probably good.
They actually asked me to sit not anywhere near a live mic, so. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, I'm going, who said that?
My name's Dan Blankenship. I'm the CEO of RAFTA.
Hi, I'm Ralph Trapani. I'm with Parsons, and I'm trying to find my presentation here. There it is.
David Johnson, Director of Planning, RAFTA.
Great. And with those introductions, this is really what was formerly called the ITSP, the Integrated Transportation Study that RAFTA had conducted, and now it's coming to a conclusion, and the results are going to be presented to the board as they continue this roadshow with this process.
All right, gentlemen.
Can I just add one thing to that? One of the reasons that it's before this board, and I've asked this presentation be made before every member jurisdiction of RAFTA, before the elected boards, so that the boards, each individual board can then provide some feedback to the RAFTA board in terms of if we decide to go for mill levy or not, and if so, what would be the appropriate amount? Where does each elected board from the different jurisdictions feel that they could support and get and garner support from their constituents to move this forward? So that's a big part of this presentation, is to try to get some feedback from our board that will be presented back to the RAFTA board along with all the other jurisdictions.
Thank you, George.
If it pleases the board, I'll start in. Again, I'm Ralph Trapani with Parsons Transportation Group, working on the RAFTA Parsons blended team to do this planning process. I want to open by saying we are also having a public meeting as part of this, and anyone in the audience, if you'd like to listen to my presentation, you're welcome to, and we have some boards and some Parsons staff up in the mezzanine meeting room. Up on this mezzanine level here, we can take some comments and so on. So we did combine the meetings, and thanks to Brian for helping us do that. So let me start. This is a really exciting time for RAFTA. The RAFTA Destination 2040, Our Future Rides on RAFTA, has now been adopted as the logo and the messaging, and this is really only the second time we've shown this publicly. We were with the Aspen Council last night. So this is the new brand and the the message that our future does ride on RAFTA for year 2040. So again, who is RAFTA? The second largest transit system in Colorado, the largest rural transit system in the nation. They operate the first rural BRT system with VelociRAFTA in the U.S. Of course, the We Cycle bike share program is important. That was pioneered by RAFTA in the Upper Valley communities, and the RAFTA Rio Grande Trail is an important community asset that myself and my family is on probably almost every day. In the mornings, RAFTA is moving 35 to 38% of all commuters into Aspen, so RAFTA is doing a yeoman's share of moving people around and providing mobility choices in the valley. Another important part of our efforts here has been to address the non-driving mode share, walking, biking, and transit, because in this region it's approximately double the national average, and that creates tremendous opportunities for additional mobility choices for us tough mountain folk. And of course, RAFTA is hauling over 5 million riders annually, and it continues to increase. So let's talk about Destination 2040 now. And some of the messaging you're going to see is keyed to the results of the polling. So we took the polling and started tuning that our messages up to respond to the polling. One of the important aspects of Destination 2040 is to reduce congestion, to provide multimodal travel options that work for any lifestyle, again, mobility choices. Expand and improve the transit service, that's been a constant we heard with our outreach, and provide modern, quieter, cleaner buses that are better for the environment. As most of you know, the efforts up here have been positive to move ahead with battery electric buses, and part of Destination 2040 is to migrate more of the RAFTA fleet towards battery electric buses to provide that cleaner, modern bus for the environment. Many stakeholders, over 20 stakeholders, of course, all the good folks in the RAFTA jurisdiction, the communities in the RAFTA jurisdiction. We also got out into West Garfield County, the folks at the Rifle Economic Development Corporation are very interested in continuing conversations about RAFTA service out to Rifle. We especially enjoyed talking to the people in the Mid-Valley. The Mid-Valley Planning Commission has quite a challenging job with the growth and expansion down there. But anyway, we'll be continuing this outreach through the next phases of the Destination 2040 plan. So here's the timeline that we've been on for really quite a while now. We started up in March of 2016, so we've been at this for 2 years. You might recall I decided not to show the infamous process chart this time, but you all have it memorized by now. Stage 1 is define the visions, Stage 2 is future needs, Stage 3 is analyze options, and we're moving into Stage 4. But I want to point out, if I don't lose my cursor, we've got 7 public meetings scheduled. We met with the City of Aspen last night. We're meeting with City of Glenwood on Thursday night, and then a variety of other meetings spread out. We're actually going to accomplish 3 or 4 meetings before the RAFTA board meeting next Thursday, which I think will be beneficial to the board. But I'd also like to point out that we are getting to the point where decisions need to be made by the RAFTA board. In the June, July 2018 timeframe, the board needs to decide on whether to add the ballot, and then, of course, if they do, what that value, what the mill levy value would be. So let me talk a little bit about the messaging and how we've rolled this long list of projects that David passed out that we were told you didn't want to see anymore. But interestingly enough, when we made this presentation last night at the City of Aspen, the first question is, well, what are the projects that are in here? So I politely reminded the council that they had seen the projects before and didn't really want to see that list of projects again, but here they are just in case. So they are up on the boards for the public to see. But what we've done is broke it down into 3 major categories, again in an effort to try to organize a massive data set. The first category is improvements for the environment. That relates to bus replacement, pedestrian crossings, transportation demand management, and also trails. Again, all rolled up off of the 40-some projects that are on the list you just received. The second broad topic is improvements for reducing congestion, improving mobility. That's expanding the number of buses. Bus expansion is more than replacement. That's new buses that you need to cover additional service improvements. Regional service improvements are on this slide, and also park and ride improvements, reduce congestion, improve mobility. And then last but not least, improvements for transportation and safety is where our facilities and housing and office projects fall. The facility expansion focuses on the Aspen Maintenance Facility and the Glenwood Maintenance Facility. Both facilities have a variety of phases that can go through. It's expensive work, but it's important work. It's important to protect the buses, keep them indoors, clean them, maintenance, fueling, and so on. And also, of course, housing and offices are critical to the RAFTA operation. And the focus there is in the Carbondale area. Some of you may remember the Carbondale Maintenance Facility, but that we call it the CMF, but that's kind of the ground that RAFTA is talking about doing some potential housing expansion and some consolidating all the various offices that they've got up in Carbondale now. So those are sort of the 3 big buckets that we're putting these projects into now based on the messaging that seemed to be positive from the polling. But we're in the financial arena now, and we're into Stage 4, which is a financial analysis. RAFTA's working hard with their financial subconsultant, PFM, to work out the details, but I want to go through some of the high-level items here with this. First of all, we need to make decisions initially on, when you're doing these analysis, on what percentage of the additional revenue should go against capital and how much should go against service, in other words, O&M. So in this particular run, we chose to split 70-30. So what that comes to, and we've broken it down to the 3 mil and 5 mil, and this is just for annual funding. So 3 mils generates about 10.5 million annually. But you see that when you do a 70-30 split, and I lost my cursor again, but you can see, there we go. You can see that you're a tick under 500,000 a year short to cover the O&M for the capital projects that are proposed by the Destination 2040 plan. When you go over to the 5 mil, you see that you're well funded for O&M. In fact, you've got $1.6 million a year excess, and you've got a pretty good chunk of money left for capital. And again, at 5 mills, you're getting approximately another $7 million a year revenue stream. So this is what it looks like pretty much on an annual basis, to give people a feel for how you can break down the service versus capital and what the annual revenue streams would be. And of course, we'll let you all interpolate between 3 and 5 mills at this point. And then when you get into this chart, you can see what happens in a 30-year basis, and I'll go up to the top here. So in 30 years, 3 mills will generate about $315 million, but we're still coming up about 14.7 million short, and again, that's just the 490,000 times 30. So you can see we're coming up short with the operating revenue, and then when you come to the bottom, these are the capital projects. We're still coming up 15.6 million short for the capital projects, and I'd also like to point out the breakdown on the capital projects. The majority at 3 mills of the percentage of the total revenue is going against bus replacement, and again, that's really a critical aspect of this. When you get to 5 mills, you jump up to a pretty hefty number. $525 million is generated over 30 years. Again, 30 years is a long time. So you end up with a good operating surplus of $48 million. And then at the end, you end up with a significant surplus for capital revenue. And again, I say surplus, but there are some below-the-line projects that are not included here, some additional circulators, things like that could start bumping in. But, I mean, you can do the analysis in your head, but somewhere between 3 and 5 mills is a sweet spot that would tend to balance off, give RAFTA the reliable revenue stream they needed for O&M and also the capital projects. Because 5 mills, as you can see, generates a lot of revenue over 30 years. But anyway, that's just a snapshot. We've got this on the boards, and as PFM starts moving ahead, there will be a lot more detail in these presentations. It would include, they'll be looking at inflation, they'll be looking at the increase in revenue potential due to changes in the property values, things like that. But getting to property taxes, and I'm very curious to see how this plays here, because this board has given me some pretty good input about how to explain this. So what does a residential mill levy look like? So here's your actual property value around the vertical axis. Horizontally is what your monthly increase in your property tax would be, and I'm just going to pull $500,000 out here. So at 1 mill, $500,000 residence is going to be about $2.50, maybe $2.75 per month. At 3 mil, it pops up to closer to $9 a month, and of course, at 5 mil, it's an even $15 a month. And then, of course, you can go in with any property value. If you did have a $2 million property, you just double those numbers. So we wanted to do this so that the public could get a good handle on this. There's a board up there that people can go and take a look at, and also to address some of the concerns that I think this board raised in particular. We did an analysis for the commercial mill levy. Again, kind of doing the same thing, except commercial properties tend to be more expensive. So the actual property value here runs up to $2 million, and you can see across the top, if you've got a $2 million commercial property, it's going to be about $241 a month for your property tax, and then at 1 mil it's down at about $48.73 a month. So again, this would give an opportunity for anybody to come in and assess what this is going. I'm sorry, I shouldn't use that word, and understand what it's going to cost them on a monthly basis.
Well, I just find it interesting because generally when we look at it like we're talking about a Healthy Community Fund reauthorization, we break it down into not monthly increase, because that's a little number. We break it down into what your yearly increase is going to be, so people know how much they're paying for the year in their property tax. Because we don't bill property taxes on a monthly basis. We bill them on a yearly basis. So for me, that's a little misleading. It sounds really good. I went, oh, $15, and then I went, wait, times 12? I mean, that makes a big difference in people who, have restricted incomes or have property that's valued at, say, $500,000. That's a different number, and I believe in putting it out there, even though it might not be as acceptable to some people to see the number. I don't want to mislead them into thinking it's only $15 a month.
Well, Commissioner Clapper, it's not our intent to mislead anybody. One of the comments that I've been getting is we pay our we pay our mortgage and our rent on a monthly basis. What's it going to cost per month? So that's what kind of drove our analysis here. But you're right.
And it's interesting. I've just always seen it presented as what it's going to cost you per year for, say, $100,000, and then people extrapolate. But that's just an interesting, because I went, 15, and then I saw that light print at the bottom that is per month.
Well,
so,
you
I
know,
just think
again,
that's an interesting way to present it.
Yeah, I've received a lot of input when I've been doing the outreach for the last couple of years. When we started looking at a potential property tax revenue stream, people really did want to know what it was by the month. So again, it's not an intent to, and there's no intent to mislead here.
But we can do it both ways.
Yeah, we can do it both ways.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, that's generally. I have not known us when we do our property tax reauthorizations or to do it on a monthly. It's just that was a new one for me.
Let me keep moving here, and again, here's the big board map of RAFTA that shows the jurisdictions, and we use this map. This was a really good base map that our good friend Jason White at RAFTA developed, and we adopted it for this potential ballot initiative because people were getting confused about where they could vote, who votes and who doesn't vote, and so on. So let me just run through. Everybody in Newcastle can vote because that's a RAFTA jurisdiction community. Glenwood Springs can vote. That's a RAFTA jurisdiction. Carbondale can vote. But unincorporated Garfield County is not a member and they can't vote. So if somebody's living up here at the ranch at the Roaring Fork, they enjoy a RAFTA service, but they're not going to get to vote on this property tax.
Well, they're also not going to pay it either.
They're not going to pay it. That's correct. They're not going to pay it. And then in the Mid-Valley area, things, of course, get a little complicated because of Eagle County penetrating the Roaring Fork Valley. And again, to prevent confusion there, we've identified precincts 7, 8, 24, and 25 as being in the RAFTA jurisdiction that can vote. And again, Basalt, Snowmass Village, Aspen, and unincorporated Pitkin County are all included. And we ran the numbers at 5 mil just to give an idea of the contributions from each of the various communities. And certainly, when we've done the math, and about 80% of this property tax will be collected in the Pitkin County area and the municipalities. But this has been an interesting map to show around, particularly to the people in the Mid-Valley, so they can understand whose jurisdiction they're in and so on.
So question then, if it fails, say, in Snowmass Village, does it fail throughout, or does Snowmass Village just not have to pay it?
Commissioner Clapper, that's an excellent question. This is a RAFTA jurisdiction vote. This is not like the sales tax votes we did in the past. You need 50% plus 1 for the entire jurisdiction to pass this mill levy. It's not done individually, which is really a blessing because that was a real brain drain doing the BRT.
Right. So if the people in Snowmass vote it down, but it passes 50 plus 1 throughout, the people in Snowmass still have to pay the mill levy?
Yes, ma'am.
That's interesting. I understand it, but I think that's interesting. I can understand how it plays out, but yeah.
Yes.
That needs to be made really
this
clear.
is for the mill levy increase would be for all this list of projects.
Yes,
to
sir.
pay for that is the purpose for it. So then the sales tax would still be being collected like on the chart here. And would you still be charging fares? I would think if I were, I mean, I am a property owner and I'm a senior citizen, so I'm riding for free already, but then my property tax would be going up if this passes. And if I were just a younger family who's not over 65, I would want to be able to ride on RAFTA for free because I'd be paying 18 or so many dollars a month on the property tax increase.
Well,
so is that any consideration for having free fares for people who are property owners?
Well,
or business owners who are paying the increased tax?
Well, RAFTA does depend on fare box revenues to make their budgets. When we did the polling, surprisingly enough, free fares did not poll as well as the poll to keep senior discounts free and to keep the fares at a reasonable level. That's what polled the best. Free fares did not poll as well. And I'm just reporting polling information at this point in time. RAFTA is going to be going through an analysis, a fare analysis, because I've been working with David to subcontract that, so there'll be some looks. But I don't think that free fares are on the table right now. I don't believe that's part of the case. In my time as a volunteer citizen down in Glenwood Springs on the City Transportation Commission, we ran free fares on the Ride Glenwood for a while, and it became very difficult to control the activities of some of the homeless people that found that to be a warm place to ride a bus around all day for free. And the institution of a $1 fare pretty much stopped that. Those are some of the challenges of free fares. Dan, do you want to add to that?
Well, we generate probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 to $4.5 million in fare revenue per year. 1 mil property tax is about $3.5 or $3.6 million net revenue to RAFTA. So, just to offset the free fare, we would take 1 mil and a partial mil to do that. And so some of the projects that we have on the list would have to fall off. And while this is a good thing, it would generate more demand for the service. And so then we would actually need more buses, more facilities, more drivers, more people to handle it. But we would not have as much revenue with which to offset those costs. So.
Dan, did you look at that as just free fares for everyone or just free fares for property owners?
Well, I think
That's
it's a little tricky to figure out who's a property owner and who isn't a property owner.
That would be different because there's a lot of property owners that don't ride the bus.
Well, George rides the bus quite a bit, and he knows how many different passes the drivers have to deal with now and how confusing that can be for users to suddenly people have a pass that shows that I'm a property owner in this jurisdiction.
That would be impossible. But the point that Dan is making, which I agree, is that the current sales tax that is a substantial part of funding for RAFTA is just to maintain our existing services. And when we look out to 2040, our financial plan does not allow RAFTA to expand, to update, to provide this long list of projects that will enhance the service and the capability of RAFTA. And so if we want RAFTA to be able to meet our growing needs of the Roaring Fork Valley and beyond, be able to do things such as electric buses, ensure that a Rio Grande Trail is adequately maintained, look at other projects, RAFTA is going to have to look at an additional funding source. And the mill levy is that option. And the examples that Ralph has shown here are just examples based on 1 mil, 3 mil, and 5 mil. 5 mil is the top level because that's just that's capped at. So that's what that number used. But they're just examples. So it could be anywhere between 0 and 5, and then depending on where that lands will depend on which projects will be able to go forward and in what timely fashion. But to look at a no-fare system, we know how much we are subsidizing now the no-fare system from Aspen to Snowmass out of the ELTC budget. So you could just expand that throughout the Roaring Fork Valley, and you'd have RAFTA that would not be expanding, but would actually be shrinking its services.
Right. Yeah, go ahead.
Part of the reason I bring that up is, like, I'm trying to think like a taxpayer, and what are they going to be saying, and then what is going to be yours and our response to them during an election cycle on we need to be prepared to let people know what are the benefits for them whether they ride the RAFTA bus or not. If they're driving their car to Aspen, how are they going to benefit from this money going to expanding the RAFTA system? So those are the answers we need to be prepared to answer to get the voter support on this.
That's a very good point, Commissioner. And we had a long, robust conversation with the Aspen City Council about this. And one of the points that I like to make is we've got to control the growth of traffic. That's been a fundamental on Highway 82 and the Mount Sopers project since I started working on it out of Glenwood Canyon in 1993. And without RAFTA, you don't have much of a chance to control the growth of traffic and still keep the economic engine operating. So this plan, Destination 2040, gives people choices. And if you want to stay in your car, that's okay. You know, because well, maybe I'm going to drive my car, but I'm going to ride that Rio Grande Trail every day. Well, maybe I'm going to take the bus. And well, there's great benefits for the bus if there's microtransit to service my bus stop or additional parking spaces. So are those the sorts of things you're anticipating we want to make use for our messaging? And
Well, absolutely, because some people are never going to ride rafting, but they'll still benefit. They'll go on the Rio Grande Trail. They'll have their car, and there's less traffic on the road because so many people are riding the raft bus, and so on and so on. There are benefits, but we need to make sure to publicize those and maybe think of other benefits that people haven't thought of yet for publicizing this.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's really a social benefit. It's similar to paying school taxes. Your kids aren't in school anymore, but you're still paying taxes, or CMC taxes. It's a social, it's what makes our society run well and provide a service for everybody, whether they take advantage of it or not. It enhances our society as a whole.
Yeah. I think we need to look at, I've always thought we needed, I said it when I ran for office in 1998, we needed a better bus system. Sorry, Ralph, rather than a train, we needed a better bus system. And that's kind of where we are now, and I think that's where we're going in the future. I just want the people to be very clear on what it is per year, per month, both if you want, for X amount of dollar value of their property, so people can actually see the numbers that they were going to be paying on their property taxes. And I think it needs to be very clear that if Snowmass votes it down, but everybody else votes it up, Snowmass is still paying their property tax, because that will come back and kick us if people aren't fully aware of that. That, you know, for all the jurisdictions need to be aware of that, so people really know what they're getting themselves into. And they need to know, if it doesn't pass, what they're getting themselves into in that case.
well, one of the other aspects, and it's, again, some of you may remember, I've been in front of the boards, we've been in front of the board several times, and you've seen the possible tax revenue schemes, utilities and lodging taxes and things. Well, landing on property tax, I mean, to give you an idea, for example, in Rifle, they're paying 5 mils for their hospital in Rifle. Again, that's the high end of the RTA here, but I needed to do that to get a little sense of balance here in terms of, you know, who's getting 5 mils and so on. But some of the other important aspects of Destination 2040 is federal and state funding picture is not looking good at this point, and as I've told this board before, it's stated in the Republican platform not to fund transit. And on the state side, what's happening is not only are the federal funds diminishing that the state tends to administer, but the state's starting to take those funds to run bus stayings. So some of the monies that were available for RAFTA bus replacement and operation is now getting absorbed by bus staying, which is a good system. But it's not like the old days where RAFTA would get a lot of those opportunities. So backfilling that revenue is going to be important. The other aspect of this that to me is very important is it allows the communities to define their destiny a little bit when it comes to transportation. I think we've probably seen much of all we're going to see of CDOT for a while up here. You know, CDOT spent $250 million of taxpayer money to finish Highway 82 to Buttermilk, and then the money spent from Buttermilk on the bus lanes and the New Maroon Creek Bridge. The Grand Avenue Bridge was a pretty big deal too. And we all know where the state revenues lie right now. And this would give an opportunity here to, for example, help out with other projects like the Buttermilk Underpass, which I know this board's concerned about. So there's a lot of aspects of that. And again, that's going to have to be part of our messaging as we move ahead. Commissioner Poshman, we haven't heard much from you today, and you attend the RAFTA board. Do you have any feelings here? Or?
No, I'm appreciating the conversation. I like where it's going. I've just been looking at the 3 and the 5 and wondering, and you've hinted that, you know, maybe it falls somewhere in between. And I'd really love to hear what you all would project would be a number if we're going to, can we do a 4 mil levy or a 3.75? And I think the RAFTA board will decide on that somewhere down the road. But I do know if we go for 5, it looks like we have a surplus. If we go for 3, we certainly don't have enough to do everything we'd hope to do. So I'm just kind of trying to get a handle on where does it fall in the middle, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, my thoughts are it's between 3 and 5, and that the financial consultant will come up with a final number. I mean, I can do the interpolation in my head, and it's probably around 4 mils will make everything Jake here. The issue, though, and let's not forget that that covers the projects you're seeing, but that doesn't cover expanded transit service in West Garfield County. It doesn't cover additional circulators in the Mid-Valley, some of those kind of things. Now, those are things that can come up from below the line if there's surplus revenue. So I apologize. The term surplus revenue is a little bit misleading. There are other things that budget could be spent on. But I'm going to just suppose that the PFM people are probably going to come out and show us that it's around the 4% range. And Commissioner Newman has had conversations. 3.75 seemed to feel good to you at one point, George. I'm not sure where you came up with that. But
that was just an example. But to answer your question, Greg, is again what the RAFTA board is looking for is input from all the elected officials. One is do you think RAFTA should be going for a ballot initiative on a mill levy? That would be important for the RAFTA board to know. And then if so, what do you think our constituents would accept? At what level? Because there is a range, and that's the information we're trying to compile. Because you could tell from that map that Ralph showed, and we know how the politics change as we go east to west, and each jurisdiction will probably have perhaps a different take on whether they feel their constituents would support a tax, and if so, how much that tax would be. So our goal from the RAFTA board is to try to gather all that information, dissect it, and then try to make a decision where we're going to go. And so we're relying on all the elected boards to help provide some input.
Well, George, let me ask you a question then. But the mill levy that's asked stays the same. So Snowmass can't say, well, we'll vote for 1 and you vote for 1.2. It's 3.75 for everybody, or it's not.
Right.
And, and I said, I know RAFTA needs the funding. I totally support a better bus system, an improved bus system, a sustainable bus system. But for me right now, I'm not sure what's all unfolding on our ballot for November just yet. And, I have a certain cause for the Healthy Community Fund reauthorization, and they'll be competing for property tax dollars. So, and on top of the fact that you cannot deduct that from your income tax anymore, that's going to be another obstacle for us, because usually you could say to people, oh, but you get to write it off. You're not going to be able to do that anymore. Rachel brings that up to us all the time. So there are some obstacles in front of us, but again, I just think the transparency, giving people information that they can understand at whatever level they're coming from is a key issue. And I think RAFTA needs to move forward in talking to the jurisdictions and making up a decision at the end of the day.
Well, we would like the feelings of this board.
I just gave you mine.
Okay.
Yeah. Looking at your figures, I think people would look at a 5% thing and say, well,
5 mil, not 5%.
You're getting, or the 5 mil, I mean, you're generating more money than you need on your chart. So they would say, no, I'm not going to vote for that because they're asking for too much. You mentioned the West Garfield County, which they're not paying anything for it, and so I wouldn't even mention that in the campaign, providing service to West Garfield County.
Unless you're going to, then you need
unless they're going to be shipping in money to the system, if Garfield County got on board for it. Now, if people maybe will ask that question, and then you'd need to be prepared to give the figures on how many people from Rifle and West, or Silt and West, are commuting to Glenwood Springs to work, or how many of them are commuting to Aspen, or farther up in the Roaring Fork Valley to go to work, because that's the justification for having RAF to go down there, is to provide a good way for the workers to get up here. But if they're not coming up here to work, why should people up here pay for the bus system for them?
Well, they may be coming to Newcastle, or they may be coming to Glenwood, or they may be coming to Carbondale, which are member jurisdictions. But Commissioner Child, I hear you loud and clear. I mean, there is a second list, and the second list shows all the other projects that we teased out that are not part of the RAFTA jurisdiction. And you could get into those projects if there was what we're calling surplus revenue, and that would provide more mobility, some better management of congestion, and so on. But those are decisions the board will make, and those are going to be interesting decisions to make. But we are dealing with a regional problem here, and I want to assure you that the good folks out in West Garfield County, when I talk to them, they want transit. They're not always given the opportunity to vote on it. The commissioners, Dan, what's Garco kicking now?
Well, right now they're contributing $732,000 for the Grand Hogback service, perhaps another $300,000 or so for the Traveler Senior Programs Paratransit service.
But that's on a year-to-year budget allocation, correct?
It is. We don't have a long-term agreement
Yeah.
with them.
Which is great that they're doing it, but
And it's taken time to kind of build that relationship with them. They want to have some public outreach meetings in Parachute, Battlement Mesa, and in Rifle in May, the first week of May, to get citizen input about the need for transit out there, what kinds of transit services they'd like to see happening. I believe the commissioners are motivated to maybe extend the service from Rifle out to Parachute so that those folks aren't disenfranchised from transit. So they're moving in the direction of becoming more involved in financing transit services, but they don't have quite the same needs for transit services currently that we do in the Roaring Fork Valley, because they've got an interstate highway. Speed limits are 75 for the most part, and they just they don't have the economic activity except in Glenwood Springs, and a lot of people just drive, from Parachute, Battlement Mesa.
getting harder and harder to park in Glenwood Springs, though, too. So, yeah.
So again, if you look at the project list, you'll see that each jurisdiction has some pet projects, some incentives that will enable their own community to be beneficiaries of a mill levy. So, for example, Aspen, you've got the ability to go electric buses, which deals with cleaner air, quieter
impacts. Yeah.
Moving around. Snowmass, you're looking at the ability to enhance service, increase the frequency of service there. As you move down valley, you've got other communities have other services projects. So for Pickens County, I think it means that we would look for a cleaner environment, quieter bus system, enhanced services, improved Rio Grande Trail maintenance. And so those are key projects that probably will not happen unless there's another source of funding for RAFTA.
And George, I'm going to pile on a little bit. There's funds in here for parking management that to me is really critical to the Upper Valley right now and the goals of both this board and the city of Aspen. We've got some facilities here. We've got the Buttermilk lot. We've got the Brush Creek lot. But there's a lot of things that can be done there, and there's some significant projects that are planned as part of Destination 2040.
Okay, so do we have enough information? We have a few more minutes because we started a little late, but
well,
we do have people.
Any option for feedback? I want to say we did get a unanimous thumbs up last night from the Aspen City Council to move ahead. That will be the message that Mayor Scattern takes to the RAFTA board.
Well, I told you where I stand right now. I need to see what's on the ballot for November, and we've got competing issues here. And, I just want to see how the other jurisdictions, granted, City of Aspen has their constituency, the City of Aspen. Pickens County, our constituency is the City of Aspen, Basalt, and Snowmass Village. So we represent people that live in all of those municipalities at the same time because they are voters, and they vote on county issues and city issues. So I think I just need to keep an open mind on it.
But am I hearing consensus to have the board move ahead, to continue, the RAFTA board to continue to move ahead looking at this? And
I don't think I'm not telling you not to. I'm just saying I'm not going to totally commit to yes. Let's put 4.2 mill levies on the ballot in November. I'm just saying I think you still need to vet it out and have the discussion and meet with the other jurisdictions and see that everybody's clear on the information. I want full disclosure of things because I don't want people to come back and say, well, I thought if we voted no, we didn't have to pay.
Well, they still will, but we've been doing outreach for 2 years now, and one of the questions we got from Aspen Council was, where did we come up with this project list? Well, we didn't make this up. This was basically citizen-driven in terms
We're
of
not,
hearing
I'm
the
not
needs
saying
and
that to
so
you.
on.
I'm just saying that if the people in Snowmass voted down, they still need to know they may end up having to pay. I just want that kind of clarity, Ralph. That's all I'm
No,
asking
that's a
for.
good point. And we do need to do better. There are some good things in here for Snowmass, some really good things, and we need to do better with letting them know what they are. We're going to be going up to Snowmass in a few weeks to talk to the council up there.
And I just
Greg,
want.
please, and then we need, no,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I want to make sure you all understand, and the board, the RAFTA board and our board understands, when we do decide on what the number is going to be, I really will work for it. I totally believe in that we need this. My biggest concern right now is just looking at the national economy, the lack of funding from the state, and probably the feds as well, where our economy is going in general. If we look like we're going toward a recession, which we all hear about on occasion, it's going to be hard for people to swallow a big, tax increase, especially when we mix it with healthy communities and whatever else is on the docket. So, that's where the trepidation comes from. But when we get this put together and the mix is right, I certainly will work as hard as I can for it. I completely believe in it.
Thank you.
One of the advantages we have in Pickens County, certainly with the municipalities, is about half of our homeowners, property homeowners in Aspen and Snowmass Village, are second homeowners.
I know, I hear that all the time. I still don't necessarily think that's fair, but that is.
Well, I'm not saying it's
relative.
fair, but I'm saying that's an advantage for us, because not only they not utilizing the services, but they're paying probably a higher proportion of taxes because of their assessed real estate, which other communities really don't have that advantage that Pickens County does.
Yeah.
Okay, Steve, do you have enough input from us?
Yes,
or?
ma'am.
Yeah, I'm good with going ahead with it. And
Oh, yeah, I'm sure we'll be hearing more.
I look forward to hearing what number you come up with for your proposal.
Yeah,
Great. Well, thank you for the
Thank you.
time, and we'll be back again, I'm sure.
great,
So.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Okay,
guys.
bringing it back to the board.
It's getting clearer each time. It actually is getting clearer each time.
I'm glad that's
We're definitely
that's a good
learning more
sign.
each time.
Better than the other one.
So we are scheduled for a 15-minute break. We are running a little behind, and we do have people waiting. Does the board need 15, or can we take a 10?
5 minutes.
10 is fine.
10.
10.
Okay,
10 would be great.
grassroots, we're going to take 10. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tuesday, April the 3rd, 2018. This is work session for the Pickens County Board of County Commissioners. And, no. Welcome back. This is Tuesday, April the 3rd. I'm going to repeat myself, but you can hear me. This is the work session of the Pickens County Board of Commissioners. Next on our agenda for today is Pickens County Solid Waste Ordinance Update. Please come forward and introduce yourself for the public record.
Hi, I'm Kathy Hall, Solid Waste Manager for Pitkin County.
And I'm Lori Batchelder Adams with LBA Associates, consultant to the county.
So we are here today to talk about the solid waste and recycling ordinance that we're in the process of currently updating. So we're really trying to make a quarterly visit to the BOCC to just kind of give you our progress report. Just a brief view on the hauler ordinance. Our current ordinance was last updated in 1991. It's a little out of date. So we are in the process. We were given the go-ahead last summer, I believe, to move forward. We've hired LBA Associates, Lori here, to work with us on doing the ordinance. We formed a stakeholder group, which consists of City of Aspen, Town of Snowmass Village, BOCC, Carbondale's joined in kind of late in the process, and us, of course. So the one big update that we have is we've met with the haulers. The haulers are going to be a big player and have a lot of input on this process. So we kind of wanted to come back together, meet with you, and just give you an overview of what the haulers had to say about our draft ordinance. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lori, who can speak about it in great detail.
So just make sure your mic is on. That's the red light.
Yeah, red light. I think I'm on. Good.
I'm actually not going to go do too great a detail because you folks are pretty up to speed with this, but I wanted to hit the highlights and acknowledge a couple of things. First of all, we're talking about an ordinance, as Kathy says, that updates a 1991 code. The guts of this, if you is mandatory recycling for trash customers, a volume-based or an incentive pricing approach, and the collection of data. We're going to do this, or we propose to do this, because we're very much in the draft stage still, with two documents. One is ordinance language itself, the items that we feel need to be regulated, and then a secondary parallel guidance document that puts information in that doesn't need to be regulated or updated by code. And we think it keeps it cleaner, so we have the two documents going. We call the second one Manager's Rules, Solid Waste Manager's Rules. The applicability of this ordinance is slightly broader. It is both commercial haulers and generators, which is different. We've broadened the applicability to haulers to include all solid waste haulers, which means the regular curbside municipal solid waste haulers that we think about and talk about regularly that pick up our home and our business waste, and also the periodic material-specific haulers, for example, the roll-off services that collect just construction and demolition debris. They will also be applicable here, although the requirements will be less. What we really want those irregular periodic haulers to do is to register, tell us they're out there, and give us their quantities because we want that data, and then they'll be relieved from the other recycling and pricing requirements. We've also captured generators in this ordinance. We want our public to be mindful of illegal dumping and blowing litter. We want our property managers and businesses to make sure they're offering recycling now to the trash customers in their entity. And in particular, on the business side, we have a couple of requirements. We want our businesses not just to be recycling back of the house where there is a back and a front. We want them to be offering recycling to their customers and their guests. So just think for a second, what we mean there is if there's a library, we want there to be a recycling container by the trash container in the public area. This is our focus is public areas. Same would be true in a hotel, in the lobby. We want the recycling there, in the retail space. So that's a requirement that we expect to hear a little bit about in our public meetings. We also are in our draft looking at requiring commercial businesses to make sure that that recycling container that they have has a capacity that's 1/2 of their trash container. So that will have some space requirements we expect to hear a little bit about. Knowing that that's coming, we've done a couple of things. We've extended from our hypothetical effective dates, we've extended an effective date for the commercial businesses out. We've delayed it so they have more time to respond, and we also have an exemption process. So there's a couple of things in there. So those are the highlights that I wanted to share kind of in general. What I do then have is one slide each, kind of summarizing the requirements for the haulers and the rest of us generators. On the hauler side, this is it in a nutshell. Annual registration, not different at all from what they're doing now, which is an annual business license. The difference is, as we get into this, for the previous calendar year, we expect their license renewal to include quantities, total trash, recycling, and organics that they collect. So we can measure generation as it changes in the valley and also diversion levels. We've already mentioned the mandatory recycling piece. The other big piece is the one in the middle with the pretty table. This is volume-based pricing. It's an incentive system. It's also what we may call pay-as-you-throw, which you folks have heard about before. It's the concept of you trash less, you pay less, you trash more, you pay more. The county, of course, like any government in Colorado, cannot set hauler rates outside of a contract. We can't do that. What we can do, though, is require a pricing methodology. So using this tabulated example, if we have 3 container sizes, because we want to get at this at a volume basis, right? If we have a small, medium, and large, which in the ordinance we've defined by quantity, and the medium is twice as big as the small, and the large is 3 times as big as the small, we can say, pick your price for the small. You determine it, but we want your price for the medium to be 2 times that, and your price for the large to be 3 times that. So what this does is gives a clear pricing signal to the public. And this would apply to residential, regular residential, not the commercial side, because they inherently have a volume-based system just by the nature of the beast. But this gives our residents an incentive to trash less. And then when we make recycling part of that service as well, they get a double incentive. They trash less, they save money, and they do it by recycling. If we embed the price of recycling into each one of those layers, they don't pay extra for recycling. They pay one bundled fee. So it's kind of a double incentive. They also are not able to opt out of the recycling in a bundled fee, so it kind of gets them 3 ways to Sunday. And we feel that this is going to be a good incentive. In fact, for nearly 7,500 communities across the country, this pricing incentive has been proven to be one of the most effective drivers for recycling on the residential side.
Can I ask a quick, how does that apply to, for example, my homeowners association? We have dumpsters. So it wouldn't be a matter of my just using one small waste can, trash can, versus and my recycling. So how does that apply to the incentive of?
Great question. And it falls back on, you know, none of this could be straightforward and simple. So we have different definitions for residential. And in the ordinance, the definition we've chosen, residential being any home or property that has their own individual container. So if you're sharing, then you would be outside the
Because we have already done a
requirement.
significant impact in decreasing our trash bins, or, you know, our because we've increased our recycling opportunities.
Excellent. There is a requirement that the property managers make sure you have recycling available. You have the service.
Ours has
but it
been
would
huge
look
in
different.
both of our dumpster areas. It's been huge. So, okay, thank you.
Sure. The only, oh, absolutely.
While we're on that topic, I have a homeowners association also. We have a dumpster shed with, I think, 3 trash dumpsters and 1 recycling dumpster, and then 1 organics small thing. And getting the service to match up with the overflow rates is the hardest thing. So how long and how often do you have to tune a system like this, and is that built into it? I'm trying to get to the, like, I can see how this could work, but I want to know how is it going to work practically, say with a system where, for instance, we have our recycling dumpsters overflowing, perhaps because it's not compacted well enough or whatever. Is it going to be tweakable, or is it malleable or nimble enough that the system like this can work and accommodate everyone, or are people going to work around the rule because it doesn't fit them? I don't know. That's a tough question. I'm trying.
Yes,
But
but a good one. Hopefully there'll be little of that. But there's a couple, 3 things there. One is we would not be applying this particular requirement to anybody whose work has dumpsters and is sharing. which and dumpsters get tricky
that's
when you've
a
got
different category.
when you've got
Got
that. That gets tricky. Number two, we would expect the haulers to be doing these adjustments as they need. They certainly could. They could be recommending that folks get a smaller trash, larger recycling, and this is what it'll cost you, and this is how we'll, we're hoping the haulers will be on that. But not to leave it all on their backs. Number three is we've been talking a lot about the need for more enforcement coming from the county to be watching out for things like that, and paired both the hammer and the soft piece of it with education. Hey guys, you've got an undersized container, or you need to go from bins to a cart, and that sort of thing.
On that note, with enforcement, the thing that we've been discussing in our home neighborhood is actually monitoring the shed with a camera or something, so you can see who's coming, a wildlife camera even,
right,
to see which license plates are using our dumpsters that are coming from outside, or who's using it the most, or is it a homeowner, or is it a maintenance or a housekeeping company that's
swings by
and uses your dumpster. Just thinking, I'm sure you've run into all those things, but those are the practicalities that we're thinking about on that end.
So a little self-policing.
Well, maybe that's what it is, does the county have a role in that?
Well,
private.
Because we hear about this a lot. One of the ways we're going to address it, as a resident, you're going to be required to have trash service. So, you can't just drive down the road. You're going to have to prove that you have trash service.
Okay.
And we're hoping to work with the haulers that if there's somebody missing on the block that doesn't have it, the county can address that. It's not fair that somebody's not paying for trash service and using others, because it's really a theft of service issue.
Right.
So that should cut down on illegal dumping. That said, though, just to be clear, in case it comes up for any of you folks, we do have an exemption from the whole ordinance for self-haulers who legitimately do take their materials to the county recycling center or to one of the landfills. The county will reserve the right to verify proof of that. We don't want to take that away from every individual, but we do want to cut down on the illegal dumping situation. So, as great as some of these methods are, there's of course no silver bullet, and there will be some short-circuiting, and we're going to try to be mindful of that with education and awareness and some extra enforcement.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, if you're going to require everyone to have a recycle container, what if you're currently, and that's going to be priced in, the hauler's going to price that in, and they're not going to do that for free. So for those who actually use a recycling center, so for example in the Willett Center, that's another little tweak that we'll have to make an adjustment for. So why would people have to be paying if there's a service already being offered?
Well, it matches City of Aspen's ordinance. So City of Aspen currently requires the haulers to provide recycling. So residents of Aspen have a recycling availability whether or not they use it. So we're trying to match up with their ordinance and maybe get away from the recycle centers' use so much if they're already being provided. It's a further discussion later down the road.
Need them for commercial, though.
Yeah.
Because the commercial people don't have space to recycle.
The other question, you should probably address this, it's just education in terms of, I'm assuming this will be single stream, but it's so easy to contaminate, as you know, single stream, and so you're going to have to educate people. Even, for example, when you talk about putting recycling in public areas, so the library has a recycling bin in there. It doesn't really tell you what you could put in there. You just kind of assume, this looks like it's recyclable, but it may not be. So that's an issue as well.
That's where the education piece comes in, and we're hoping to launch this ordinance in January 1, 2019, and in the budget process really beef up our education and outreach as well as enforcement capability.
Yeah. I just think you need to address unincorporated Pickens County. So people who live out in rural areas who compost, have their own compost, who utilize an existing recycle facility, unless that recycle facility is going to be closed down, it's a little bit different than in the municipality.
Right.
And I would just say that you've raised good issues, and things we'll see, hopefully to a small level. There'll probably be more at the beginning, and hopefully we'll get control of them quickly. And they're not unusual from what other communities who've done this. Yes, we have a mountain community, and that makes it even a little more variable. But we feel pretty confident that this is a set of approaches that are going to get the goals of increasing diversion, getting us better information, and providing consistency up and down the valley. So good points, and we'll probably keep talking about them as we get this finalized. If there isn't anything else,
Nadia, what are we doing about bear-proof recycling containers? Because, you know, they still smell what's in them, and you still see, you know, the little blue boxes out by people's trash can, and you see those recyclables scattered everywhere in the mornings when the bears are out and about. Are we looking at bear-proof recycling containers at this curbside?
Yeah.
Sorry, one more thing for you to think about, Kathy.
We've had a lot of discussion on the bear-proof containers. I believe in the ordinance we have a time frame in which you set out your trash and recycling. So was it 7 in the morning?
Till 7?
Or till 7 at night, then it has to be in. And then that's where the enforcement piece comes in. If your container isn't off the curb by...
Or if it's out the night before.
The night before or something, then...
Like the city does.
You get warning, because bears are an issue.
Mm-hmm. And as you know, even in the county, even though they're confined to those hours, they need to be wildlife resistant if they're trash or other putrescibles, right? But you're right.
Yeah.
The recycling bins are not.
And the other thing is the organics, the compost. It's really used a lot in my homeowners association. It'd be great, and I think that's going to be somewhere down the line. We're going to look at that further, because I think that's another area we need to be looking at some point after we get this one through.
Although, and while this does not address mandatory organics collection by any means, as you can see, we do have a note here that we have built organics language into the ordinance in 2 or 3 places where we say if at such time the county manager adds organics to the mandatory recovery list, these same rules will apply for those kinds of containers and that kind of collection. So we've kind of just left the door open and left ourselves a foundation.
For future discussion.
The last thing I wanted to mention on this slide is that there is what we call a flow control clause in the 1991 ordinance. And we're going to hold on to it. Flow control, in case you haven't heard it recently, is simply a statement or a policy that a government puts in place that says any solid waste generated in our jurisdiction will stay in our jurisdiction and be managed at our facilities. Which, if it was enforced, it's in place now. If it was enforced, that would mean that waste collected at the north end of the valley that's actually closer to South Canyon could not be taken there. The haulers would have to bring it back up valley. The county does not enforce it now, but they do want to leave it in, given that, in case there's a time in the future when that's important. Think when the next generation of solid waste facilities are in place and tip fee revenues are badly needed to pay for it, pay it off. We want to have control of as many tons as possible. So the haulers have noticed that, but the county's intention is to leave it in, and I think you'll hear about that, so I want to make sure and mention it.
I think we'd rather keep some of those trucks off the roads coming and going up the valley right at this point. Steve, please.
I was wondering if you have any idea of how many people from Glenwood Springs are bringing their recycling up to Pickens County landfill, or has there been any noticeable change since they closed their recycling center in Glenwood?
We had a small increase from our 2016 to 2017 recyclables, but I can't tell where that's coming from. So, and again, we can get data, at least from the haulers, of where they're bringing recycling in and
and that just is one small example of the flow control on people, the things going to landfills that aren't necessarily the right one, but
right. So
I think people in Glenwood are splitting it either way. They're coming up valley, they drop it off at Willits if the time frame works, and if not, they go to South Canyon.
And then haulers are dictated by their routes. Where do they end up at the end of the day? What
Right.
are they closer to? Where do they want to start in the morning? So a lot of those things play in and they change daily. But
Greg, please.
One other thing I'd like to bring up, and it may not fit exactly here, but I think we should be looking at plastics reduction incentives, maybe. If we could be using compostable or recycle or degradable plastics that don't last 100 years, but maybe only last 5 in in the waste stream, we'd be doing a big favor to our oceans and our fish and our rivers and to our landfills. And I'm just wondering, can we build something like that into this, or is this a separate ordinance down the road?
I don't know if you have control over the
Well, not
retail sales of.
it's probably hard in here, but a lot of cities and communities are going to plastic straw bans,
Right.
single-use plastic bans, styrofoam, and we've started to kind of look at that.
Beaver Creek, Colorado, I hear
Yeah.
has and that's just shocking.
Serve you a straw
Wait a
with
minute,
your drink,
we're
yeah.
supposed to be first on that, right?
I know. So I can see us after we get this out of the way, working towards just maybe starting with a straw ban.
Well, Pickens County doesn't have a lot of people who serve straws. It's more a municipality thing. Doesn't mean we couldn't kick it off, but
Right.
what would our impact be?
Styrofoam.
There's a lot of things we need to incentivize, I think, within our municipalities who have a greater impact.
Yeah, we'd have to get Aspen, Town of Snowmass Village on board to kind of go along with us. So it's been done. It can be done. So
Special event recycling could be a next,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Product.
We're pretty good with
Product.
that, aren't we?
Procurement.
Yeah.
yeah. Any other comments right now? Okay, we're good to keep going.
I just have 2 more quick slides, and one of them I wanted to just summarize the generator requirements. Now, this is focusing, switching our focus to all of us who create waste at home, at work. The obvious illegal dumping and blowing litter restrictions are in there. We've talked about the requirement for property managers and businesses to provide residential recycling. I hit initially on the commercial requirements, the need to provide recycling at both the front and the back of the house, and to have recycling containers that have some equivalency to trash, and the fact that we have a delay and an exemption process to help us mitigate the initial impacts of that. I think I've kind of run over these, so I don't want to, since we talked a bit before, I think I'll skip these unless you have immediate questions. Because this slide, although there's a lot of words on it, and I apologize, felt it was important to share with you the big hauler issues. I've sat through a number of meetings where we've done new ordinances, or we've talked about going from open systems to contracted regulatory systems, and public meetings can get wild. They can be pretty emotional. I know you guys have seen your share, but on the garbage side, it's sometimes surprising. These are the big issues we heard from the hauler last month. And this is how we've responded to them so far in our draft. Just wanted to bring you up to date. They were worried initially that we might be asking for proprietary data that would hurt their competitive edge. We since clarified our language to say, no, we don't want account-specific information. We're looking for total quantities that you haul. They also were a little frustrated by our initial draft that had registration fees on a per-vehicle basis. And the hauler said, whether we're small or we're large, we have to have redundancy in our system. We have to have spares. And they may never hit the valley, but we've got to get them in case they do. We don't want to pay registration fees if they don't come up the valley, though. So we said, okay, we can fix that, and we came up with a different pricing structure that you've probably seen. We also heard from a number of haulers that this residential volume-based or pay-as-you-throw may be challenging because really not all of the residential customers are regular curbside customers. There are so many long driveways or inaccessible, unimproved roads or garages that have to be gotten into for the, boutique services. So we grappled with that a little bit, and finally we came up with a new definition of boutique or extended collection service, and we exempted those from the pay-as-you-throw process because we agreed it would be difficult for them to apply where they had all these different rate schedules for different services and hard for the county to administer. So we backed off a little bit there. We also started out by saying that mandatory recycling service at homes had to at least be a medium-sized toter, a medium-sized cart, which is about 64, 65 gallons. And the haulers made us realize that we could do that, but the predominance up and down the valley are the 18-gallon bins, and it would be a bit wasteful to get rid of all of those or reuse and recycle and buy all new, so we found a way to work that in. The haulers have warned us the 50% commercial recycling will be challenging, so we're prepared, may need to find some alternatives there, but we've provided the mitigation measures I've already mentioned. And then this container size switch at no charge may sound like gobbledygook, but our feeling there is that residents are going to be a little bit overwhelmed and at a loss when all of a sudden they get this new service, especially if they're a large 96-gallon customer and they're thinking about going smaller and they're just not sure if it'll work, and they're going to have lots of extra garbage issues. You know, do I dare go medium? Do I dare go small? Our feeling is if they can switch it out with really minimal hassle and no cost, at least in the initial period of the program, that they'll be more apt to do it and to downsize, which is the direction we want them to go in. Haulers were worried about the flexibility of the wildlife-proof code that you already have, and we've shown them that that code actually allows alternative containers to be approved by county staff, so they don't have to stick to a rigid list. That seems to make them more comfortable. And then the flow control clause, the argument is if you're not going to use it, get it out of there. I think the county's decided they're going to hold fast there. The only thing I would add, we met with one final hauler who had a heck of a scheduling conflict just last night. Small hauler, and they added a couple of things. They said, please, anything the county can do that can help us with education and consistency, because we're so small, you know, we need everything to be the same, everybody to hear the same message, and enforcement. We can't enforce all of this ourselves. We need you guys coming in once in a while, especially the first year or so. So we noted that at that as well. So that was the big information. I want to be mindful of our time. Just let you know where we stand. We have revised the ordinance. I think we're on version 7. So every time we get new, better information, we bring it up to date. We're about ready to go back to the haulers, and we plan sometime between now and early May to have an all-hauler meeting and see what they think about this latest version, give one more set of feedback from them. We want to compromise and meet our goals, but make them find a practical solution for them as well, to whatever extent we can. So that's coming up. When we've done that and adjusted from that round of meetings, we intend to go public. And we'd like to have general meetings. We want to get out in front of our property managers, our citizens, our businesses, our institutions. And we thought we'd actually ask you folks if you had any thoughts on that. Our typical strategy is to go geographic and make sure we cover everyone. We'd really like the trustees, 1 or 2 of you, to be at those meetings if possible, to add oomph and credibility to this. And also wondered if perhaps you wanted these meetings in your caucus areas. What makes sense to you? We're looking at summer months at this point, and just thought we'd see what you might think.
Well, caucus meetings should have their schedule posted, and I'm sure if we needed to, we could get you invited to speak at those caucus meetings that are coming up. Looking at those of you who have specific caucuses. The other thing, I just think that the consistency with the municipalities is important, and how we can bring everybody on board at the same place would be important. Any other suggestions from the board?
Well, in the Snowmass Capitol Creek caucus, almost the only people going to the caucus meetings now are the board members. It's been hard to generate any enthusiasm in our area since the split for larger turnouts, which we used to get larger turnouts. So,
this could be it.
That is at least a portion, and you could get feedback from different people representing different parts of the caucus area. If you came to the caucus meeting.
Okay. I have the list of all the caucuses and the head of the caucus, the email, so we'll send out invites and see what we can get. And certainly keep you posted on who accepts.
Greg, please.
I would just advocate for when you do these meetings and with the groups, give them the opportunity to vent or speak about the thing. It's cathartic. If you don't, it just builds up and then it really bites you later. So keep people involved from the get-go. Maybe let them help design the program if that's not too scary, just so they feel like they really have an investment in how it's going to work.
Good point.
Because we're all different here. and I just want to make sure, people, the biggest complaint I get is that they don't feel as if they're being heard, and that may go on forever even though they are heard, but you still have to do it. And I'll happily attend, when I get the schedule for my area or wherever, depending on how many you do, of course.
There should only be 23 or 4.
Yeah, okay.
No problem. Just put them in.
I have one more thing that's somewhat related. We're getting ready to launch a Cover Your Load campaign. If you've driven up 82.
Isn't that a state law?
It is. Not everybody's following it.
The law.
82 just seems like this year's particularly bad. Blowing
Trash
litter
on the
on
highway.
82. So I'm working with Pat Bingham and our marketing firm, and we're getting ready to launch this. It'll be advertisements in the paper. There's going to be some radio spots. We're going to do a postcard that because we see all the haulers coming in, that'll be handed out to the haulers, mailed to them, and then we're going to beef up. Not much I can do until they show up at the landfill without covered load, but if they don't have a covered load when they arrive at the landfill, they'll be warned. They do it again, there's a fine. And yeah, and this will be on social media and try and
Have
get
you
the
brought
word
the
out.
sheriff's office in on it?
Yeah, we've talked to Alex Burchetta, and they do on occasion check loads.
I call in all the time. I call the company on the sign of the truck and say, you guys driving on the highway without his load covered.
And another good option for the public, if you do
Distracted
see
driver.
someone, we do get calls at the landfill. I was just behind so-and-so. And then when they come up, we'll warn them.
Yeah, I think that's a big issue because Greg's been very clear to, well, we all see the trash on the highway this year. So, and I think a lot of it is coming out of trucks. Even pickup trucks should still be covered because that's where you have the insulation that's flying all over the place.
So the postcard that goes out has all the rules on the back
Let's have a
of
pickup
what
truck.
will. Yeah, it's cute. And then the county's annual roadside cleanup day is May 17th. It's been scheduled, so
Right.
there'll be a cleanup day then.
I understand the roadside cleanup is for our section, or the county's section, right? So we're going to try to expand that to go beyond the 2-mile stretch that we've adopted.
Okay.
So I think right now we are, is it Shale Bluffs to Twining Flats, I think, is our section.
Something, yeah, I like that.
But we still have Twining Flats down and up to the roundabout, really, where I think we should really work on getting the entire community to participate because it really is a mess. And that I probably had more calls on trash on the highway this winter than anything.
Okay, so maybe a cleanup day event.
Yeah, I was thinking I love the artwork for the poster. This is great. I'm hoping it has a number to call as well, like that number, like how to get through. If you see somebody in the highway and you want to call the landfill and say, hey, look out, here comes, because I tried that once this year and wasn't sure which number to call.
Okay, yeah, we can add that.
And then also maybe a little radio and bilingual, with the radio stations and then bilingual signage as well.
It will be on the Spanish language radio station as well.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I think also clarification about what is a secured load. Our pickup truck, when it goes, is probably one of the few that uses a lasso to lash the stuff on.
It's very Picken County,
but
yeah.
it depends on what someone's hauling, and do they need a tarp or do they not need a tarp if it's some more solid stuff that our lasso will hold it in there and keep anything from leaving the truck while we're going. So I think clarification on what is a covered load and what's the state law say would be important.
Torn tarp that's flapping around with
Yeah, or even if
stuff
it's
out
just
is
your
not-
lunch, your
not-
bags of lunch
Not
in
in the
the back.
definition, yeah.
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 Okay, that's good.
Thanks.
Anything else?
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks for
thank
coming.
you. Thank you very much.
Exciting stuff. This will get the Snowmass Caucus back into a room together.
Yeah. Okay, we are moving on to our citizen board interview. Our first citizen board interview is with Marsha Goshon for her renewal for the APCHA board. Would you please come forward, ma'am, and just introduce yourself to the public? Okay, introduce yourself, please.
I am Marcia Goshorn. I've known, I think, almost all of you about 40 years, so I believe the housing program is a very important program in this valley. It's one of those things where people who actually live and work in the valley needed the help, and the APCHA program actually supplied that.
And you are reapplying because?
My term is up. They did put a limitation on it, but it doesn't start until a new term. It didn't automatically apply to the current board members.
Right, who were on at the time they enacted the term limits. So you are exempted from that, your time starting at the time that that restriction came into play.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, questions from the board? Steve, please.
So, Marcia, I know you're passionate about housing issues, and we've talked many times about various issues.
Mm-hmm.
So, based on your time on the APCHA board, what do you see as successes, and what do you see as places that need improvement in your estimation?
Well, there are many successes. The place I live, Common Ground, was a project where the people who live in it were the ones who had a hand in designing it, getting it built, doing a lot of the work on it. I mean, we met once a week for 4 years getting it ready to go, and we've now lived there for 25 years. And it's 21 townhouses. It's where the county built, when they built the new hospital. We came to the county commissioners as a group and said, would you let us come up with a plan? And the county was very much a part of our project. It's one of the things that I do believe that APSHA really needs to keep all different people on the board, different age groups, different, from the entire area. I know the city has been appointing a lot of next-gen people. They don't have a majority yet, but it's one of those things where if you don't have people of all different ages and different incomes and different things on the board, you don't get the knowledge of, all the different areas when you're coming up with a decision.
Okay.
George, please.
Marcia, thanks for all your time on the APSHA board and for reapplying. So as you know, there's been some talk that's has been, I guess would say, it started from City Council and looking at the governance of APSHA and the makeup of the and the roles and responsibilities of the APSHA board. What are your thoughts about that?
I truly believe that the county is very much an important part of APSHA, because one of the things the city has kind of said is that, Picken County really shouldn't be a part of it, that the city of Aspen should be making the decisions. But when you consider how many people are coming from down valley and working in the city of Aspen, which we need those employees, it would also be helpful to the traffic situation if we had more people that weren't coming from Rifle or, places where RAFTA is expanding their service. I mean, RAFTA, that program is amazing. I mean, it's helped the affordable housing program because people can find places to live down there, but the traffic is something no one likes. And I do believe that we do need more senior housing. I mean, I would love to see a senior project built, because we do have quite a few seniors in the valley that have units that they raise their families in, but they don't have the ability to move into something else because the prices are so high on a lot of the units that have come open. So if we had a place with maybe 1 and 2 bedrooms for seniors, we could get some of the seniors to move out of the 3-bedroom units they're in and be able to stay in the community, because I don't want to lose all the seniors. Most of them in this town work until they're in their 80s.
And volunteer.
Yes, and they do keep the volunteer programs active in this valley because the seniors volunteer on a regular basis.
I'm not sure you answered my question. Maybe let me rephrase it. The concern that's been brought before us, that's been discussed, starting with discussions with the City Council, is the question whether the APSHA board is really following a true governance policy, or is the APSHA board spending too much time on administrative issues and not looking at broad policy issues?
Well, we've had administrative things come up because we've had issues with certain things. So we look at those because they tend to kind of butt heads with the other issues that we need to, the overall issues that we need to deal with. So I think we'd rather not have to deal with administrative issues, but sometimes that comes up and we, deal with it.
Okay, thank you.
Just thinking about the balance, the board, how do you think the mix is now? How do you think it could change for the better if it were to change? And also tell me a little bit about terms and term limits. I know you've been there for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. Are there others in the community chomping at the bit to get on, or do you feel, what's your take on the pool of resources out there, that could round out the board, or just wondering how you feel about being there. You've been there like 20-something years now,
No,
right?
11 years.
Oh, 11. Oh, I thought it was 20. Oh, wow. Okay.
Probably seems like 20 at times.
There are times when
it
and I know
does
it's a
seem
tough,
like 20 at times.
it's a tough job. I understand it. I applaud you and commend you for doing it for so long. I know it's not the most glamorous position to be in. You're on the hot seat, and there's a lot of controversy at times. So I do appreciate you being there.
Mm-hmm. The one thing I don't want to see happen on the board is I don't want to see any majority opinion be everyone appointed. I mean, I respect the Next Gen Commission in the city of Aspen, but if they end up with a majority on that housing board, we could have problems. Because they've come before the board to say, we want this implemented or this or that. And there are things that could hurt the program as it stands now. It really needs to have a board that has all the opinions and all of the age brackets represented. Because the one thing I've always believed is the best way to get the best result is to bring in the opinions of all the different things and have them sit down and speak face to face, so you know exactly where the other side on an issue stands. Because sometimes it's, if a decision's made without those discussions happening, it's one of those things where you find out after the fact, it's, ooh, I didn't think of that.
So they've enacted term limits a few years back, and it's 2 4-year terms. Is that what the term limit is? So this is a board that does has enacted term limits. They just didn't apply to the people who were sitting on the board at the time those term limits were enacted.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Mm-hmm. So, and Marcia, we do appreciate your effort and your willingness to reapply and continue to do this. So, Steve, did you have any questions?
Well, I was just going to respond to your comment, Greg, that I'm not sure there is anybody else who has applied for.
Yes, we have another.
Is there one other that's applied?
We have another
for this?
interview coming up on April the 10th. Okay,
so, I mean, there is interest in the community in APSHA and what it's doing. It receives an inordinate amount of publicity in the paper at times. So, typically we don't have a whole lot of citizens beating down the doors trying to get on our committees. So it's nice if we have 2 people who apply that we can have a choice there.
The Next Generation group has really wanted to put more people on the Housing Authority Board, and the city have appointed a few Next Generation people.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, any other questions? So, Marcia, we have one more interview that we know of now, and so that'll be next week, so it'll take us a while to keep that. I don't know if we're still advertising for this seat. So we'll get back to you.
Cindy would know.
But you need to be on a microphone, so we do have one more interview coming up, but my question is, when we're closing the ads for this position? And that's, I think, pretty much up to Charlotte.
Yes. And I just got an email from Charlotte this morning that one other person has applied, and probably the earliest that they can get the person in to interview is probably the 27th of April.
Oh, so we have 2 more coming up. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So that's in addition to the one next week.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for that
Marcia.
clarification. Thanks, Marcia. Thanks, Cindy. Okay, we are going to move now to Will Brown, who is applying to be the youth representative on our Healthy Community Fund Grants Evaluation Board, which is really exciting. So Will, please introduce yourself and tell us where you go to school and what grade level.
I'm Will Brown. I go to Aspen High School. I'm in sophomore year.
We like bringing you guys in young, and then we can keep you on this board for a couple years. And just so you're aware, the time commitment for this grant committee is kind of consolidated. You get a 3-ring binder. It's about this big. Sometime in, I think is it late August, early September?
Mid-August.
Mid-August. And then we give you time to go through it. And it's a huge learning process, and it'll amaze you to see how many opportunities we have for nonprofits in our valley. And then we have consolidated meetings to go through the grants, usually I believe in the evenings. You go through and you rate all the grants, and then you make your decisions, and then you present them back to the Board of County Commissioners. So this is our one volunteer board that we are excited we get to appoint youth members to. So we really thank you for coming forward, and we hope that this opportunity will be available to you, and because I don't think we've had anybody else.
We have one other person who may be interested, but she hasn't applied yet.
And we have 2, I think, openings.
Yeah, so we usually have 2 youth, and then we have an adult, just a regular person, and then I just found out today that someone else is going to be moving, so now we're going to have replace 2.
Oh, 2 adults and 2.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
and 2 youth.
perfect. Yeah, George.
Well, thanks for applying. So, have you known any other students that have served on this committee?
Yes, I have. Robbie Francis did.
And what have you gleaned from them? Have you talked to them, discussed that you were interested in applying, and have you?
Yeah, I talked to him about it. He really enjoyed it. He thought it was a really good way to give back to the community, which I thought was really interesting.
It's also a great experience for moving on to college to have this background. So.
And do you have any? I saw some of your interest, but when you're reviewing the grants, there's usually about 75 to 80 grant applications, and over a whole gambit of different types of nonprofit organizations. Are there any nonprofit organizations that you have more of a empathy for than others, or interest in?
I'm pretty interested in like working at like homeless shelters. I don't know. I think it's like just really cool to be able to help people who are less fortunate.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, Greg.
I want to hear about your filmmaking interests.
Yeah.
Filmmaking or film watching?
Filmmaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I film my friends doing like skiing, and then I just make like short films about them. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I was going to ask the same question: is if you had any special interests that in the community, for instance, are there any particular groups that you would be interested in participating in outside of this? Say some of the nonprofits. Are there other nonprofit groups that you're part of? And I don't see it. Anything in our list I don't think is here, but I'm just wondering, are there any other organizations you're at? Homeless shelter, did you say, or you're involved with them somehow?
Yeah, I went to San Francisco for a while and worked at a soup kitchen with my school.
Yeah.
And so that got me kind of motivated to help out here more.
Excellent, great. Well, I'm reminded, I only remember this written down then, but when I was in high school here, I was an advisor of some sort to some teachers group, I think, and it was a little bit intimidating at first, and then once you get into the groove, it's actually a lot of fun. So you've got a great mentor here.
I know Will, so I'll keep him, moving along here.
Well, thanks for applying.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Yeah, likewise, we really appreciate when the high schoolers are able to participate on the Citizen Grant Review Committee. I noticed that you played on the football team, and that would come, your football practice would come kind of at the same time as when the Grant Review Committee is meeting. So do you anticipate that you might have at some point have to skip a football practice, for instance, to go to the meeting, and would that be a problem, or perhaps looking at it from county point of view, perhaps the meetings could be timed so that it would meet Will's schedule.
Yeah, we worked with Robbie on
Robbie
that,
was
so
a
it
football
hasn't been a
player.
problem. And also around their, what is it, XED? We've changed the review time for the youth, so.
Perfect. Thank you.
Because they're valuable.
Okay.
Do you have any questions for us?
No.
You sure?
Yeah, I think
it's your opportunity.
Got everything.
Well, we really do appreciate it. This is exciting for us to bring youth to the table, literally to the table on this one. Any other questions from the board?
Just one on that. It said that the terms are 4 years. Of course, Will's not going to be here 4 years, we don't think.
No.
So he stays for a year or two, or is it a shorter?
Well, we'd love to get them a rising sophomore, so we have them for junior and senior year, so.
2-year program?
Yeah. That's what we try to do.
Excellent. Hopefully you can find someone else to do it with you, right?
Yeah, that's part of your mission.
Yeah, and you know, we've never had this happen, but if we had somebody who was going to stay over and say go to a local community college, we would consider keeping them on because they're still youth and they're still involved in local education. So we've never had that opportunity, but
they always fly
it
the
doesn't
coop.
mean, yeah. So that would be great. So we really do appreciate your coming forward, and as soon as we interview the second, if we have one, if not, we will appoint. We'll have to just let us know what the time frame and if that other person is interested, so we can get him up to speed here and get him going.
I count on you being very, critically inspecting each one of these applications to make sure that it's a good use of public funds.
And ask questions.
Ask those questions, right? I'm still learning that myself.
All right. Thank you very much, Will. We
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for being patient
for
waiting
coming.
for us. Next, a citizen board interview is Michael Kinsley. He's applying for the Open Space and Trails District 4 position. Michael, welcome, and just introduce yourself for the public, sir.
Hi, guys. Shoot.
Okay, introduce yourself. We need to have your voice on the tape for
Michael Kinsley, Old Snowmass. You want my...
resident of District 4.
Yes, right.
You haven't changed a bit since you sat here.
Except the room. The room changed.
Except the room.
And we do appreciate your applying. We know you've been closely following one of our latest issues, and so we've been seeing your face a lot lately. So we appreciate seeing your face here today. Does the board have specific questions?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, because I don't want to say don't take this wrong, you're not Johnny come lately, but we've had this process with the Crystal River Valley Trail going on for several years now, and I have noticed that you've just come to the last couple meetings. Maybe I missed some other ones in years past, which is great, but I'm just curious where your interest lies in that particular project versus other projects that Open Space and Trails has done and is ongoing. And are you working for anyone specifically or any organization
Nope.
while
My
you're
interest
going?
is professional as a
Okay.
facilitator. So I don't have any,
This is perfect.
I haven't looked at the details, the content closely enough to know what result I think ought to happen there. But I'm really keen to have a process that works in a way that's most productive. So my suggestions to you all were based upon my knowledge and experience working community process, both in lots of communities around the country, as well as with a lot of design work at RMI, to develop a process that was least painful and most productive. So I haven't worked for anybody. I sort of know both or all, several of the sides, if there are sides per se, and was most interested in the process.
Okay, because as you know, this will be probably one of the bigger issues that the Open Space and Trails Board, along with the BOCC, will be dealing with at least for the next year or two until we decide on what path we're going to take.
Literally.
Yeah, it's interesting that the assumption is that because somebody speaks out on an issue that they have some commitment to a particular outcome. That's not the case with me.
Okay, well, great, thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Greg?
I'm just interested in your, well, you've been here, you've been in the community, you've been active for so long, and you were around at the inception of the Open Space and Trails program. You provide some institutional knowledge that doesn't come from being on the board already, and I think that's kind of interesting. You're looking at it not necessarily from the outside, but not from deep within the organization. And I'm wondering, where do you think, what's your perspective on open space and trails for our watershed, say, in the future?
So I think the first county acquisition was North Star, and I was on the board when we did that. That was before there was an OST, when the Board of Commissioners in effect sat as the OST, just as it in effect sat as APCHA at one time, because the county started housing before the city did. So by default, I've sort of already been there. And the particular outcome that we sought with North Star is indicative of my perspective on open space and trails. And from the very beginning, we wanted essentially no human activity south of the river in North Star, with the possible exception of scientific inquiry, with some minimal, closely watched human activity on the north side, at least because it was impossible to keep people out of the north side. So that really indicates what my general perspective on open space is, and I think that was a hell of a good outcome, too. I assume I mean, the activity up there now is pretty intense compared to what it was 45 years ago when we acquired that. So for me, ecological integrity first, which is another way of saying wildlife per the ordinance. Second is scenic value. Third, actually second for me is agricultural value, to the extent that there is on a given piece of land. I think the experience of the Adirondack Park Agency is useful to see how ignoring agricultural history can really screw up an open space program. Adirondack Park Agency learned that the hard way. So first ecological, second ag, third scenic value, and lastly recreational activity, and done very carefully. And I think the biodiversity piece of the policies developed by OST relatively recently are right on point. And I was relieved to see OST. I hadn't really thought about applying to OST until very recently, so I just saw it from the outside as a very good move. Is that responsive?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up. When North Star was created, wasn't Nature Conservancy or someone else involved at the very outset? And the question I'd have would be, what's your take on working with other organizations?
Oh, absolutely, a good idea. I think it's a good idea for a couple of reasons. Frankly, I don't remember. It seems to me like TNC was, but I can't remember.
AVLT was part of it too.
I think it might have been pre-AVLT and then
it was pre-ACES. Well, whatever. There was a third entity besides the buyer and the seller, and I think that not only is it really valuable to have a nonprofit as part of the game because they have different resources and they're informed differently and in accord, but also for a given piece of land. I was on the WinStar Conservancy Board, being a long-term employee of RMI, and that land, I don't know the legal term, the party to the agreement, there's a term for that I can't remember right now, the beneficiaries, included not only the county, but also AVLT. And I think what's really powerful about that is that it's really hard to cause a change when you have so many entities involved. It is a better way of preserving, of assuring long-term preservation, as contrasted to the danger of a capricious Board of Commissioners sometime in the future doing something wacky and saying, okay, we're changing all the rules and we're going to build a shopping center over here, to state the absurd. That's always a possibility when there's only one owner.
Right.
If there's multiple owners, there's a real safeguard.
Final question. Regarding what appears to be lack of funding on the part of the feds or the state to take care of, say, campgrounds. We know we run the risk of losing campgrounds in the vicinity, some adjacent to our open space areas. we've been asked, and we're actually helping, and the Open Space has done a spectacular job helping the Forest Service and helping with Maroon and Conundrum and Difficult, I believe, and maybe some other places. What's your perspective on either working with those entities or actually maybe taking over where they've abdicated, or at least assuming the responsibility to protect the land and the areas, the trails, if they've abdicated due to lack of funding?
So I've given that zero thought in terms of OST's position on it, but I was involved when the new forest supervisor came in with his effort. I was helped facilitate. He hired me to facilitate the conversations amongst a whole bunch of NGOs in the valley about management of, well, not just management, but overall use and management of the forest, and all the help he could get from volunteers. So I would go lastly to county taking over, county/OST taking over the management of the campgrounds, and try to explore a whole bunch of other people doing it first and not get stuck with that. It's a great thing for locals to participate in the management of the federal lands, but the more we do that, the more that they depend on it, and the easier it is for Congress to shine on their responsibility to refund parks and forests, which they've been completely irresponsible about for the last 20 years or so. That tangent, sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just thinking, yeah, they may have already done that.
Yeah, okay.
Well, thank you.
It is, abdication is a good, the Forest Service hasn't abdicated, Congress has abdicated.
Well, it demonstrates you're a glutton for punishment, so you're probably suitable for a position like this.
Thank you.
If you've come back to us after so
I've
many.
already proved myself to be a glutton for punishment in a public entity, right?
Steve, did you have questions?
Yeah, I wanted to drill down a little bit on your view on trails. You put as your hobbies skiing, kayaking, bicycling, hiking, and wandering aimlessly in the woods. So I take that to mean that you like to go on the trails sometimes for perhaps cross-country skiing or bicycling, but you also like use the rivers for trails also.
That's right.
Kayaking.
Yep.
And then you also go off trail when you're wandering in the woods. Yep. So what you must have an interesting perspective on your view on trails, and how many trails should we have? Have we been putting too much emphasis on trails in the OST program, or what's your perspective on our emphasis of trails versus the open space aspect?
I have a very cautious perspective about more trails. Truth is, I don't know that we have too many, or that we should or should not do more. Haven't looked at that carefully yet. But my overarching view on it is that there's always going to be, there's been a particular upsurge, a disproportionate upsurge in demand for trails in the valley in the last few years, which has increased more rapidly than the population has. At least that's anecdotally, it appears that way to me, and I think the numbers tend to show that. The population has gone at some rate, and the demand on the trails has gone up at a much more rapid rate. If we supply trails to respond to all demand, we're going to have trails everywhere. And so I want to think about 50 years and 100 years out, and there's going to be massive demand for trail use 50 and 100 years out. And I'm fearful of that, especially mechanized trail use. We don't know what kind of machinery people are going to want to take into the woods in 10 years, in 15 years. I think we need to be very cautious about that. The brilliant person in the Forest Service who, before mountain bikes got going in a serious way, prohibited mountain bikes in the wilderness was brilliant. Before there was a real constituency to push against it, they prohibited it, so that it became a given for almost all mountain bikers as they got into the sport. And I have a similar perspective about trails here, that we should be very cautious about where we put trails. And maybe we have to, I mean, to me, Red Hill is a sacrifice area for trail use. It's decimated ecologically. As a non-scientist, I just look at it, and it's just barren in places because it's so heavily used and used off-piste. in a way that's really ecologically damaging. So to me, that's like a sacrifice area for heavy trail use, just as we sacrifice urban areas for heavy human settlement activity instead of spreading into the woods with sprawl. I think the analog is there for trails as well. I don't want to see trails sprawl the same way I don't want to see human settlement sprawl. Is that a long answer? Is that responsive?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to get your perspective on where we are, and you projected it into the future too, where we're going with it.
Do you have any questions for us?
Well, if y'all do appoint me, I'm going to want somebody, one of y'all, to give me some deep background on what's been going on, as well. I'll be asking Gary the same thing, and Graham and Howie and others, as well as Tim on his way out. So today I don't have any questions, but I will in the event that I get appointed, because I want
If
to.
you have questions in the interim, you always know how to find us.
Beg pardon?
If you have questions in the interim, you always know where to find us.
Yes, ma'am.
So let me just respond a little bit, just because
Yeah,
it tweaked
go
the
ahead.
thought. There is a lot going on, and there is, as you know, projects go on for years and years. So there's a lot of institutional knowledge that you can gain on that. And there's a learning curve, but I'm not too concerned about you doing that. But my question then is, these are 5-year terms. So it's hard to know
They're
the
2-year
future.
terms?
There's not 5-year terms? I'm sorry,
No.
Gary.
This for District 4 is
Oh, it's just
to
filling-
finish
oh.
Tim's till 2020.
Oh,
So it's a
okay.
2-year. This is
So it's just
just
2
to
years.
appoint
Oh,
till
so-
Tim's, yeah.
So that's
What are the normal terms?
that's an easy commitment. That's an easy commitment then.
Yeah, that's a piece of cake.
Well, Gary, wait. What are the normal terms? 4?
The normal terms are 5
They are
years, and
5
they
years.
rotate every year.
Yeah, because
so that's
my-
why
thanks,
District
Gary.
3 just did that.
Because my point is, it takes a long time to sort of get up to speed, just like sitting on this board.
That Graham told me a year would be a good time frame.
And then, yeah, right, and so then you don't want to sort of lose someone after 2 or 3 years, right? And start all over.
Right, sure, yeah, I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
hopefully if y'all appoint me 2 years out, I won't be so disgusted with this guy that I want to get out, you know?
Okay, great, thanks.
He's a hard
Or
guy
the
not to
opposite.
like.
But also, I'm pretty old, so who knows whether I'll survive that long, you know?
Well, you have to survive that long because we, as you know, we just interviewed housing, and Centennial stays de-restricted until 20 years after your death. So we're going to keep you on life support, Kingsley.
I'm well aware of that. Sam Brown reminds me of that every time I see him.
Can we
We've been
insure
very
this
careful
guy?
not to write that into any of our agreements. There's
good.
the last remaining
And I don't
commissioner.
remember why we did that. It seems really stupid in retrospect.
Well, you know,
seemed like a
sometimes
good idea
you do
at the
those
time.
things. Okay, well, we have at least one other candidate to interview, and you don't have to jump up right now.
Okay.
And so we will, and I don't know if we'll have anybody else applying right now. I think we just have one, but we are leaving the
It's
advertising
open for another week.
Yeah, so we will keep you posted and let you know when we make a decision. And thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
It's
Thanks
nice
for
to
coming,
see you
Michael.
again, Michael.
Appreciate you stepping up.
Yes,
Scary.
ma'am. Did you just say?
I know.
I spent some formative years in the South.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, next item on our agenda, future agendas. Anybody have anything specific? I'm meeting with John Peacock tomorrow to go through my list of future agendas. Does anybody want me to carry anything on to him?
Did we lose John for some reason?
Yeah, he had to go to a P&Z meeting on the ambulance district.
He did forward me some of the things that you might want to think about. One of them was the extension of the e-bike moratorium. The e-bike moratorium ends May 1st, and the process that we're in right now will wrap up in May. So you probably want to extend it for a month, and that would be at your April 25th meeting. You'd want to extend it potentially. We should have a recommendation to the Open Space Board and the Board of County Commissioners in May. So that would be probably, most likely on the agendas for May 9th and May 23rd. And then if the BOCC changes our regulations, which currently prohibits, then it would go back to RAFTA to see if we can match, if it doesn't match.
So is it
Okay,
1
great.
month a long enough extension, or should it be smarter to go for 2 since we're pushing the June 1st date?
John said you'd be smart to go for at least a month and a half in case we in case we missed anything, because the thing is, once you change the regulation, you can end the moratorium at that time.
I'd just rather go to July 1st and not have to bring
we
it
don't
back
have to
again.
make that decision
We,
now.
we can discuss that when we're discussing.
No, because we need to make a decision to bring this back in the next, when you have a resolution to
Oh,
bring
I
it
see, on
back.
future agendas. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
you'll need it for the 25th agenda.
we should have that on future
Yeah,
agendas
get it
for
on the
discussion.
future
And let's
agenda.
bring it, I would bring it, is the board okay with bringing it back until July 1st and just giving us some time?
Yeah.
We can always cancel the moratorium June 1st if we want to, or
Right, yeah.
June 15th or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let them know that. And the only other thing was at the joint meeting next week at your work session, the question is, do we schedule a third meeting afterwards before we put it out for public process, or do we if we have 2 hours and we have, I think, almost 2.5 hours on next Tuesday's meeting, or you think that you'll be ready to release it for public comment? You can always schedule it for one more work session and have the Board of County Commissioners make that decision, because, I saw from Patty's letter to Kevin, you kind of thought that you'd go through the segments, go through everything at this next meeting. We do all the changes and potentially bring it back one more time for you guys just to say.
And then release it to the public for public comment.
Right. So if you want to do that, that would be a future agenda for probably April 24th.
Yeah, I think that makes sense for us to move it out, because we'll be giving staff lots of comments on the 10th, giving it back to them to come back with a final draft for us to discuss and see, and then send it out to the public.
Well, it works for me. I'm just curious, does it work for the Open Space and Trails Board trustees?
Well, what you can do is, since, basically get their, recommendation at the next meeting, and then, you guys have to give the final, it's the Board of County Commissioners that gives the final okay for public comment. So we can invite them. I know a few of them are on, at least one will be on vacation at that time, but we can invite them to that meeting, and you guys can give the final nod at that meeting with any input from them there. So, the thought was, at the next meeting, we could, at the end, go through all the changes and make sure you guys are okay with them. You're releasing it for public comment. That's not the final draft. You're still going to have almost 3 months of public comment before you even come back to then approve a final draft. And so, it's really up to you guys if you want to just say, okay, let me just see one clean document. I want to see exactly what it looks like before I say go. And we can do that and invite as many as Open Space Board members that will be there.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Does that sound good?
Okay.
Okay, let's plan on that.
So we'll put
then.
that on the 24th.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
So does anybody else, Gary, don't go anywhere. Does anybody else have any other comments on future agendas that we can either address through Gary, or I'm writing them down to deal with John Peacock tomorrow? No? So Gary, while you're sitting here, I'm going to skip to one of the items in our open discussion. Do you mind?
Sure.
We have the opportunity to make a decision on the District 3 Open Space and Trails Board position. We've had 2 applicants. We had Amy and Molly. We've interviewed them both. I know we were going to wait till Rachel, but we don't have the application the opening advertising has closed, so these are our only 2 applicants.
Has the advertising closed, or is the actual, is
No,
there a
we're no
deadline?
longer taking applications
We're
for
no longer
District 3.
taking applications, so
For
there's
District 3.
For
no,
District 3. District 4 is still open.
no possibility then of somebody else coming
We've
forward.
not had anybody even make any notice of interest.
Okay.
We could wait till Rachel comes back next week, but I thought it might be beneficial to appoint one of those 2 and then invite that person to the April 10th meeting as just an observer, because we won't be able to formally appoint them till resolution on April 11th.
Yeah, I would like to go forward now.
Okay.
And as usual, we've got great applicants.
We had 2 really good applicants.
2 very good applicants. They're both very good, and I wouldn't have a problem with either one. Having said that, I think I'm going to put my vote in for Amy Barrow. I think Amy is she's politically savvy. She served as a trustee on the town of BOCC. She's been involved with the Roaring Fork Volunteers. They have sort of similar backgrounds. She's a landscape architect, which is great. But I just think that her past experience would bode well, especially as we're going into some controversial issues as we move forward.
Yeah.
So Molly would be great, but I think at this point I'd like to see Amy in that position.
I agree with that, and depending upon where the other two go, I want to make sure that we let Molly know we'd like to have her participate in some way. Maybe the weed board. She's got great ag and landscaping and plant experience, master gardener experience. So, and she really does want to do something and participate in Pickens County. So, Steve or Greg, your positions?
I was leaning toward Molly only because she's a brand new fresh face to being part of the public process here, but she does have a background. It seems like a solid background with land and nature, and her interests are certainly in the right place. So I was kind of thinking for the reasons of being new, fresh, young face. That's kind of what I'm looking for.
Okay, Steve?
Well, I was going to say this is such an important appointment that doing it without a full board sitting here to make the decision, to me, is, I think we should wait till Rachel is here, but then we would need to make sure that Rachel watches the interview of Amy, because she and I weren't at that interview, and I just watched the interview this morning. I watched both of them this morning so I could kind of compare, and they both have positive points to them that, you know, speak for appointing them. I would like to get Rachel's input on the decision, and I mean I could go with either candidate at this point, but I think it's such an important, you know, our appointment on the Open Space and Trails Board is a long-lasting appointment, or can be a very long-lasting appointment when we look at Hawk and Tim both having served all the years that they did. So I would prefer to wait till Rachel has gotten to weigh in on this also.
No, and not that I disagree with that. My intent, my concern, my interest was to have somebody appointed in time for the next joint meeting. So that person is actually sitting at the table with us when we discuss the actual phases of the proposed draft plan for the Crystal River Trail. So that was my push, to do it without Rachel. So if we, you know, and I hate to continue if somebody's not here next week, we can keep continuing this.
When is she back?
Just make a decision. Well, Rachel was supposed to be here today, so that was the plan for us to make this decision today. So
someone can always be sick, or someone can always be out.
Yeah.
You know,
so I
with three,
really
I'm concerned with three. With four, you know, sometimes you have to make a decision if you unless you're not sure. But I mean, you can.
And also, we couldn't officially appoint either one of them before we have our next joint meeting.
No. We can appoint somebody without a joint meeting. It's not up to Open Space and Trails.
Right.
And what I clarified was we would invite this person to sit at the meeting, the joint meeting, but not have any privileges or authority to vote, because it would take
They wouldn't be an official.
Not until the next day, on Wednesday, the 11th, when we'd have a resolution come before us at a regular meeting.
Yeah.
But I was really hoping to have somebody appointed in time for the meeting on the 10th, so they could actually participate at the table, because that's going to be a big meeting with lots of discussion. I'm looking at you, Steve.
So I could just say I would rather have Molly, and then that would force us to wait until Rachel's at the table.
If you want to play games like that, that's fine.
Okay, then we will postpone.
And so I will do that. I'm going to say, you know, I would like to have Molly.
Okay, then we put Rachel in the swing seat.
And I reserve for when Rachel is in the discussion to, you know,
change your mind.
Change my mind, because having her input into the discussion, I think, is important too.
Well, I think we're going to have a loss of not having that person present at that joint meeting. So, but that's a decision that you've made, so we'll have to move in that direction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, moving on.
So moving on, we have, what's next on our? Legislative updates. John had a whole list of things. The only thing we have before us is a letter that's drafted. It's actually going to the House State.
No, Kara.
Kara's not here. I can't say anything because I'm not on it. So this is a letter for signature by me. It's actually the bill is probably going to be killed, but we want to get our voice heard now. It's having to do with broadband. And it's a very simple 3-paragraph letter. I just need the board's permission for me to sign. I can sign it tomorrow and have it sent off.
I'm in.
Okay. Anybody else?
That's fine.
George? Okay.
That's fine.
So I will.
I'm good with the letter. Just because something's before the House State Veterans and Military Affairs Committee, which is commonly known as the KILL Committee, that committee occasionally does pass bills on favorably.
That's why we're sending it on.
And so I think it's worth sending the letter and supporting the bill because it's an important issue.
Okay, so we will move it forward, and I will sign it tomorrow when I'm in the office. So, Lisa, did you want to be our final wrap-up here? And I don't know, does the board have any other open discussion outside of Lisa's? No, we're good? Please introduce yourself for the public record.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lisa McDonald with the Pickens County Healthy Rivers Program. Joined today by Quinn Donnelly with River Restoration. Quinn is one of our water engineers, and he's been in front of the board a few times before, so I think you all know him.
Everybody.
Get it going? All right, cool. So we are here today to get direction from the commissioners on a potential project on the Roaring Fork River that is located near True Rivers Road and Highway 82 at the KOA, and it's called the Robinson Ditch. It's right on the river, on the right side of the highway as you're going up valley.
So the Robinson Ditch is the one that goes to the Elgibel that was the Crawford's main ditch. It's the big ditch that runs right by the softball field down there. Is that correct?
Does Robinson go that far?
No, that's Robinson's is above Hooks Bridge, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, just upstream of there.
Yep.
And their main client is Mid-Valley Metro. I think 50% of the water goes to them.
Does it cross 82 and go over there, Steve? I can't remember.
I believe so, and it runs behind the Ace Lanes Tree Farm,
up that
back against the hill, and then around to Elgibel.
Right.
So I'm a little confused. I'm a little confused. What's the issue? That's in Eagle County.
Yeah.
Well, there's a hazard on the river, and it was brought to our attention and the River Board's attention after the work on the Whitewater Park. It was identified as a hazard actually from our work on the Whitewater Park through conversations with the angling community, the boating community, and it's a big hazard in the river.
Oh, okay.
We can do any work in the Roaring Fork watershed, so that's it doesn't have to be necessarily in Pickens County. So that's why.
So what was the hazard? How
is it the weir?
If you want, I have some pictures and things, and I'll show you guys.
I think it's the head gate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we just kind of wanted to introduce you to the concerns, and the River Board had requested staff to take a look at it. We've talked with the Robinson Ditch Company, the Mid-Valley Metro. We've talked at staff levels with Eagle County and their attorney and their engineers. And we then consulted with River Restoration to look at some proposed scenarios or potential enhancements or modifications out there. So I think I'll let Quinn take it from here, and he can do the presentation.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lisa. Again, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having us here. Lisa had asked me to come and give a kind of a presentation on this. It's a concept, really, and the goal here is to kind of show you what's going on, describe the problem, and then get your recommendation on whether you want to pursue this project or not. And so, we're at the concept starting to do fundraising phase, and we'll come back and present again to you once we get a lot of the more details worked out. So this is kind of a background into the project and just kind of the concept that we developed. So here's a map showing where the site is. The Whitewater Park is there in Basalt, and then I don't know if you can see it, there's that orange line, that's the Eagle-Pitkin County boundary. So as George says, it is just north of that line. It is in Eagle County on the Roaring Fork River, right just upstream of El Jebel. This is kind of a zoom in of the current configuration. I have some historical photographs I'll show here in a second that show how it's changed. There's Highway 82 on the upper left. There's the Rio Grande Trail. So the head gate is basically on River right there. You can see that. I don't know if you can see the mouse. This is the head gate right here. So this is their intake ditch, and then the water. So we're a couple feet higher than the river here, and then it dumps back in. Anything that doesn't go into the ditch dumps back in downstream. And so this is the navigation hazard. You guys have floated or fished this reach. And I'll have some pictures of it here in a second. This is the area that we've identified. So this is a picture of that boulder structure at low water. And as Lisa was saying, just to point out, so here's kind of the boulder grade control. Here's the intake to their ditch. So it flows down. Here's the actual head gate, and then the ditch continues down off the screen, and then the river goes here on the right. This is at about 500 CFS early last May. As Lisa said, it's been recognized as one of the primary hazards in the river, downstream of Wingo Bridge, basically. Through our work at the Whitewater Park, we talked to a lot of the angling and boating community, a lot of the fishing guide services, including Roaring Fork Club and Taylor Creek and those folks in Basalt. And they all identified this as basically kind of their number one hazard. And a lot of them don't float this reach of the river because of this diversion. Of people, that do try it, particularly during low water, a lot of times get in trouble and flip here. During high water, it is passable if you know the line, and I have some pictures of high water here in a second. And so, over time, and I have some historical photographs, the ditch company, they go out and they've just kind of added boulder here, and it's just really kind of a big jumbled mess, and large woody debris hangs up on it regularly. Here's kind of a ground view of it. So this is the river left bank, and the irrigation ditch goes off here on the left. And so as you can see, it's just kind of a jumble of boulders. There is kind of a low flow area where I'm going to talk briefly about fish passage. I think this is the area where fish, adult trout and stuff could probably swim up this, but a lot of this is really kind of impassable. So here's at high water. This is a little bit before peak runoff last year, so about 2,700 CFS. The peak runoff was about 3,500. And so as you can see, just from those two pictures, the large amount of woody debris that's accumulated on here, most of the water is being pushed through. There's a big return flow from the irrigation ditch. This is kind of at bank level, and you can see here's kind of the line you would take to go through here. If you don't know that and you end up over on this side, people get in trouble pretty quickly if they don't know that pathway through. So, a big goal of the project is to, make improvements to this and really provide a consistent pathway for boats to get through and really open this up so it's a lot more viable for folks to float this reach of the river. And really, honestly, once this is open, you can get, all the way down through Carbondale and into Glenwood. There's not really any other big navigation hazards in the river all the way down to Glenwood.
What about fish availability or ability to get back upstream if we do some reconfiguration? Yep, and
I got some opportunities here, and I'll talk about that fish passage. Feel free to interrupt me if you guys have questions. I prefer kind of the more informal versus me just sitting here talking.
Now, is there one other hazard? I was thinking of the other hazard that's closer to Willets. It's it's almost like a weir structure or something that crosses.
And that's just above Wingo.
Above Wingo.
Bridge,
okay.
Yeah. And that one has been reconfigured by CPW recently, and I floated through that one a couple times, and definitely not ideal, but it is passable.
Better than this.
It is definitely better than this.
Right. Okay.
You can pass it at most flows, and there's definitely a line you can get through. And there are downstream of Wingo Bridge as you go through Basalt or El Jebel and down in between Carbondale. There are a couple things on the side you have to watch out for, but this is the only channel spanning one.
George, please.
I have to leave in 15 minutes.
Okay.
So.
Okay, I'll go.
Do you have any comments you want to throw in here in your next 15
No,
minutes?
I'll wait,
Okay.
but just so you know, because according to the schedule, I've got an appointment. So.
Okay.
I set this up to be like less than 10 minutes. I'll go quick. So just this, I thought it was interesting to show you the history. This is 1994. You can see, I mean, there's an extra side channel here that's no longer there. The configuration of the boulder structure is much different. You know, now it's here. Here's the head gate right here. So this is 2004. A lot easier to see. The boulder structure is still controlling water coming into the ditch. You can see how this is, you know, up above the drop. This is totally filled in, and this is the ditch company extended this upstream. So then we get to 2016. Now, you know, this is totally blocked off. So the boulders actually don't control water going into their ditch system anymore. It's controlled by this riffle upstream. So really, all this is doing is holding grade. You know, if we took this out, the river would likely head cut upstream. So that's not part of our concept. But we do want to basically kind of rearrange this and lower it, and then extend that drop upstream. And I'll go into that in just a second.
So this isn't creating head for the ditch at this point?
No longer, no. It's there's a couple feet drop over this thing, you know, upstream, and basically this riffle right here, you can kind of see the start of it is controlling water through there. There's, you know, I think it's 1.5 feet or 2 feet of drop from here down to the boulders.
And how would any restoration there address all the debris that gets jammed up in there, which can be a public safety issue if it was to be released at one time, or?
Yeah, well, so the debris that would be currently there would be removed by our contractor, and he would dispose of that, you know, out of the river. We can't, you know, it's going to be a structure in the river. It can't guarantee it's not going to catch debris, but we can design it so it's much lower in the water column and smoother transitions, and, you know, and things that get caught would, as the river comes up, it would kind of float that and carry it downstream.
Okay.
So this is kind of our opportunities and, I guess, design concerns for the project. You know, number one goal would be safer boat passage, you know, a consistent flow rate for folks to be able to get through there. We would try to improve fish passage. Right now we think that, you know, adult trout can get through there, but we think, you know, younger trout and other species probably can't get through this just based on the velocity measurements we've taken and the criteria that CPW has provided us on other projects. We'd like to reduce in-channel maintenance, you know, mainly because, you know, the ditch company goes out there with their equipment and materials without, you know, they're not required to use a lot of the same protections for the river that we would on a regular project because of the agricultural ties. And so, you know, reducing the amount of time that they have to go out there is a benefit for them financially, but also, you know, it helps the river. And then we want to really build a stronger relationship with the valley irrigators. It's really a pilot project for, you know, maybe future work to make improvements on other things, you know, not only on the main stem of the Roaring Fork, but up on the side channels and creeks. So, you know, if this goes well and other irrigators see that, hey, this is a possibility, you know, they might be more open to ideas. And then our design concerns, you know, ditch operations is the big one. We can't impact that. They need to get their water. That's probably number one. We can't degrade flood conveyance. You know, we got to consider sediment transport. There's a lot of material that transports through this reach during runoff, and then we want to make sure we maintain the stability of the channel and the bed. So the county asked us to look at a couple options, and then we developed a concept based on feedback from those, and this is kind of our preferred concept. It's a little bit hard to read. This is looking straight down, upstreams here, downstreams here. So basically we would rearrange these boulders and lower this about 2 feet. So it's just basically a grade control. And then all that hydraulic head that we were losing here, we'd spread upstream. And so the idea would be that we create a, you know, kind of a controlled riffle that they come down and it crosses just like a natural riffle would. And so folks just really kind of treat this like they would a lot of other sections of the river versus having this like, you know, one grade control structure right out in the middle. And so, and then this it looks a lot bigger in this plan view. It's really just a couple of boulders up here to maintain grade for the ditch company, so they, you know, that's how they get their water, and we'll maintain that elevation for them and hopefully reduce their maintenance. I always get ahead of my notes here. One second.
Army Corps permit would be needed?
Yes, so we would have to do a permit through the Army Corps and consult with the CPW.
Any estimated costs at this point? No,
Just
just
looking
as
for
a
some
preliminary,
direction right now.
you need a nod for us to have you pursue the next steps.
So
George?
I guess I don't understand. This is requests that would be coming out of the Healthy Rivers and Streams Fund, and so has the Healthy Rivers and Stream Board seen this presentation? Or are they going to make, usually they'll make a recommendation to us?
Right. They saw it last fall, I think, down in Redstone, and we had some just some pretty basic concepts for them to review and look at. Excuse me, and they directed us to continue on with it. So Quinn, they've developed it a little bit more, and so now we wanted to come to you and see if it's something we really want to pursue, or if it's something the board's interested in.
And so it goes back to my first question. How did the construction of the kayak park impact the ditch? I didn't see anything.
Yeah, so we, you know, a part of our permit for the Whitewater Park was to evaluate downstream boat passage through the Project Reach, and everybody we talked to, you know, identified the Robinson diversion as the biggest hazard in the river. And so just through our conversations with folks about the overall reach there through Basalt and Elderbell, this was identified. And then last winter we presented it to the Lisa had us present to the Healthy Rivers Board, and they were interested, and so we developed some concepts. And so we're at the stage now where would be pursuing fundraising, other activities, and John and Lisa and the board thought it'd be appropriate at this time to present to you.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. I thought you were saying that when we did the kayak park, it contributed to a problem.
Oh, no.
I misunderstood you.
Brought to our attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it just was highlighted through that process.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
And so all these other entities, have they made any sort of financial commitment to work on this in a partnership?
Well, we're working with Mary Kenyon with Impact Marketing to look at some grant opportunities with NRCS and the Ditch and Alliance
And the Colorado Basin Roundtable.
And the Roundtable, we want to go to the Roundtable and look at some other funding opportunities. Like I said, we've talked with Eagle County a little bit, but we wanted to get direction from the board before we really went any further.
I've got to run, but I would be supportive of working collaboratively in a partnership, but certainly not be carrying the heavy load on this.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, George.
Thanks, George.
Steve, please.
Looking at it as an irrigator, I could tell immediately the whole picture that the ditch company would have put all those boulders in, because that's where they used to bring water from the river into the head gate.
Exactly.
None of those boulders are needed for the ditch anymore.
Right.
And the ditch company could potentially need something up at the head of their mill race, partly to get enough water to go down to the head gate, and also to protect the whole dike that they've constructed along there.
No, and I know
that could easily wash out in a high water year if the water, if the flow of the water gets tweaked a little bit the wrong way, so it's hitting that gravel bank of the mill race.
And it's a little hard to read here, but this is that what you're talking about, Steve, is this kind of a small boulder thing, basically at grade, but to maintain that elevation there. And then anywhere we're directing, more water into that bank, we're putting boulders. And this is just a concept, we would do a lot more analysis and study to make sure that we maintain, the stability of that dike. Because, we don't want the channel to degrade there because of improvements.
Yeah, and to keep the ditch company happy and the irrigators in the whole Roaring Fork Valley on.
Exactly.
On our side, you want to make sure that you're not washing a bunch of gravel down into other people's ditches or mill races farther down the river, and not cutting the banks farther down the river.
Exactly. No, I agree. No, and really, what the concept, it really is making the hydraulics a lot milder. We're spreading that big hydraulic out over a much longer distance, so it does help with that stability concerns.
Yeah.
Well, I support moving this forward. I think it'd be great. Can you go back to the
Sure.
drawing picture? Who did that? I like it.
Oh, this one or the next one?
No, the next one. The
painting?
This one, yeah.
Yeah, Hattie Johnson that works at River Restoration put this
And I like
rendering together.
especially the birds.
Yeah.
I think we need to move it forward. We need to have a better plan, and then have it go back to Healthy Rivers and Streams and have them give us a formal recommendation to move forward. I think great idea to work with partners, get everybody involved in this. I know it's been an issue. I've had personal reasons to know of this as an issue for safety on the river. And I think it's great, and it also shows that we are not just restricting our funds just to efforts within Pickens County, that we want to work valley-wide, or watershed-wide, I should say.
And, you know, I guess, so this is folks we coordinated with. Lisa's already mentioned most of them, and they're all on board, and we wanted to meet with you guys before we got the Eagle County Board of Commissioners involved.
Yeah, and whatever we can do to help.
And so next steps, you know, Mary Kenyon has developed a fundraising strategy, you know, talking with the Basin Roundtable and stuff. We feel like a lot of this can be funded through grant opportunities and other things outside of just money from the county.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And so we're going to keep continuing, you know, once we get the board's blessing, we continue coordinating with stakeholders, agencies, and then we'll develop a much more detailed design and start getting the permitting process going.
Yeah.
And just so you're aware, the Basin Roundtable is really pinched for money right now because it relies on the oil and gas severance fund, which is basically they're not guaranteed any money this year from that. And they're hoping in the long bill, the finance bill that's going through the legislature right now, they're hoping that the Colorado Water Conservation Board gets money through the long bill, but there's no guarantee. So we can't totally count on it. You can still make the grant application, but
right, of course. And we have developed some concepts that, you know, kind of a range of cost depending on how the fundraising goes. And so we have some other alternatives to look at.
Bring those back. I'd love to look at the costs.
Yeah.
Now, did you say CPW contributed to repairing of the one downstream, the one at
Wingo?
At Wingo.
Oh, I'm sorry, Hooks.
Or Hookspur, right?
Yeah.
No. So I'm just wondering, can we tap them for contributing to this? I know they haven't.
Yeah, they're on the list.
They're on the list, but they haven't been contacted yet, or they haven't been engaged yet.
Yeah, just informally we talked to them. We haven't really kind of sat down with their plan and say, hey, what do you guys think? But obviously they're going to be the biggest commenter on the permit, so we want to get them on board early.
Right. My biggest concern on it is that I think it'd be great to improve it for safety, for fish, certainly for the irrigators. That's necessary for preserving the river. I wouldn't like to see it turned into something that resembled an amenity. Like the Rissid really looks like we've gone in there and done a facelift on the river, and I've had people comment and said, really, it's a shame to protect the river, you had to destroy it. And that really hurt. but I happen to agree with them. When this is done, it'd be great if it didn't look as if we'd gone in and rearranged the rocks in the river.
Yeah.
And I know it's a mess already from a rearrangement and a dam that was built that's no longer needed. But do you think it's going to be one of these things where we're going to have bulldozers and restoration in the riparian area and all that in order to get this done? Because you've got a pretty big area of work there.
Well, I mean,
can't be done by hand,
I don't think it's going to be a park-like amenity like.
No, there won't be any whitewater features. There won't. The idea is to especially with this concept, is to return it to kind of a more natural riffle where it comes around the bend, crosses over to the other side, and
a few boulders placed in order to direct the water as needed to keep the head for the mill race.
The piece is, even though from the surface those don't look very big, they have pretty big footers because we don't want them to scour out in the road during the next runoff, and so there will be. I don't think the construction window will be as big as the Whitewater Park because it'd be a much smaller scale. But there will be a period where there will be bulldozers in the river and moving the boulders around, just because in order to get those footers in and get those boulders in the right spot so it looks right and it functions correctly, you got to have some in-channel work, unfortunately.
Right. And that's what the irrigators do anyway, I assume.
Exactly.
When we're pushing rocks around.
Right.
And we would have BMPs in place to reduce sedimentation in the river and a lot of more protections in place that they don't necessarily have to use because of their status.
If at the end result it looked like we hadn't been there, that would be a success for me.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the problem with the Whitewater Park is we had to do something to shore up that road because that road issue has been such an issue for so many years when it washed out.
Right.
I remember how many years ago. So we had to.
That's years.
And if you remember, that was one of the reasons why that site was selected, because that area was already degraded and that bank was already, we didn't want to tear up a nice riparian,
They were using old cars to stabilize that bank,
exactly.
going back to the 60s probably or earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah, I understand.
There's some in the river just up from the Robinson Ditch too that people, if you see them up along the bank.
Yeah, we'll find. We're doing a project out in Newcastle right now this little fish passes around the Warenheim Diversion Dam. Out in the middle of the floodplain, we dug out for the fish passage channel, and there's like a 1930s Chevy just buried under
where
there.
the old
We
cars
had no
are.
idea it was there.
Collector's item.
Collector's item, right.
Cool.
Hey, well, thanks for coming.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right, thank you. Oh, and on a side note, the Osprey has landed.
I know, I got pictures today.
Did you? I saw it the other day, and I've never been so excited. Is the camera's not up yet?
I think it's there. It's supposed to be running, but I don't know that they've got it turned
Yeah, it was in the
on
paper
yet.
this morning that they were putting
Is it?
in.
Oh, I
Yeah.
haven't read that part. I'm so excited.
I know.
You've seen my pictures on
I know.
my Osprey. Okay, thank you.
Thank
Any
you,
other
everybody.
comments from the board? Thanks, guys. Oh, you need me to sign documents.
Yes, they do.
I'm good.
Any other comments?
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Okay,
Quinn.
Grassroots,
It's great
thank
to
you
see
very
Thanks
much.
for coming in.
Appreciate it.
Nice to see you as always.